1. The anchor of the present moment. Settle in. Let the weight of your day, all the emails, the errands, the decisions, the noise, drift away. You are lying down now, perhaps in a room engineered for perfect rest, blackout curtains drawn, the temperature just right, the soft hum of an AC unit or fan, creating a sound bath around you. You have done everything modern science and good intention tells you to do to invite sleep. But rest, true rest, can sometimes feel elusive. You close your eyes and the mind starts its restless circuit, reviewing, planning, worrying. You feel in that moment entirely modern, entirely alone in your struggle against the demands of the day. Tonight, we take a different journey. Tonight, we understand that this pursuit of rest is not a modern struggle at all. It is not even uniquely human. It is the oldest imperative in life itself, a 4-billion-year-old program, a fundamental principle woven into the very fabric of existence. Your need to rest is the echo of the first organism to ever greet the dawn. To truly understand sleep, we must travel back, far past recorded history, past the first fire, past the dinosaurs, past the fish, back to the planet's turbulent chemical beginning. Imagine, if you will, the world 4 billion years ago. We are standing on a planet that is mostly ocean, shrouded in a primordial atmosphere of volcanic gases, steaming and volatile. There is no oxygen to speak of, no breathable air. The surface is a chaotic canvas of geothermal vents and mineral-rich seas. This world is beautiful in its terrifying, barren youth. This is where the story of sleep begins. The only constant, the only rhythm, is the one that has governed the cosmos since its birth, the rotation of the Earth. Day, night, sunlight, a chaotic bombardment of energy, darkness, a period of cool, protective shadow. And in that vast, churning ocean, life is emerging, not as creatures, but as chemistry, self-replicating molecules huddled inside tiny bubbles, learning the first, most critical lesson of survival. Survival is a rhythm. Every organism from this moment forward would need a clock, and that clock would be the sun. 2. The great imperative, building the first clock. Why was this clock so necessary? Because the arrival of the sun, the very force that powers life, was also the greatest threat. The earliest forms of life, the ancestors of everything that swims, crawls, or walks today, were single-celled organisms, the masters of the primal sea. Chief among them were the cyanobacteria. They were revolutionaries. They were the first life forms to master photosynthesis, the process of harvesting sunlight to create energy, and, as a byproduct, oxygen. This was a world-changing event, but for the cyanobacterium, it was a dangerous gamble. Photosynthesis is an inherently messy, destructive process. It generates highly reactive, toxic molecules, what we now call free radicals, that can instantly destroy the cell's precious DNA. Think of it like running a complex chemical factory. When the sun is high, the cell must open its doors, take in the raw energy, and run the machinery at full throttle. But to survive the toxic byproduct, it must know with absolute precision when to seal the factory shut and dedicate itself entirely to repair. And so, 4 billion years ago, inside the tiny jelly-like membrane of a cyanobacterium, the very first internal clock was born. We call it the circadian rhythm, from the Latin circa diem, meaning about a day. This clock was not built of springs or gears, it was built of proteins, molecules that rise and fall in concentration on a 24-hour loop, driven by the Earth's spin. Its most famous component is a set of 3 proteins known as the Chi clock, a self-winding chemical oscillator. When the sun begins to fade, the Chi proteins signal to the cell to stop all energy production. It pulls up the molecular drawbridge, shifts its focus entirely inward, and begins the long, silent work of DNA repair. It checks the structure, mops up the toxic waste left by the day's work, and resets its molecular balance. This is the first darkness. This silent, restorative pause, this molecular shutdown, was the earliest form of sleep. It was not rest because the cell was tired. It was rest because the cell needed to survive the toxic consequences of being awake. And this fundamental, rhythmic trade-off, energy output for maintenance input, is still precisely what your body does tonight. The chemical recipe hasn't changed, only the size of the factory. 3. The scaling of the cycle from one cell to a colony. For the next 2 billion years, life remained largely single-celled, but the rhythm of the Chi clock proved so effective that it became universal. It was the operating system of the biosphere. Every single life form that evolved inherited this blueprint. Now, fast forward past the invention of oxygen and the Great Oxidation Event to the time when cells began to cooperate. Multicellular life emerged. Sponges, jellyfish, sea anemones, creatures with no brain, no central nervous system, and yet they slept. How could a jellyfish, a pulsing bell of gelatinous tissue, sleep? Because the clock wasn't centralized yet, it was decentralized. Every cell, every little pocket of tissue still retained the 4 billion-year-old programming. When the light faded, the collective cells slowed their metabolic rate, reduced their movement, and entered a state of diminished responsiveness. The cellular imperative for repair took precedence over the need to interact with the environment. This is a profound realization for your modern mind. Sleep does not require consciousness, it precedes it. Sleep is a feature of cellular biology, a prerequisite for complex existence. Consider the simple sea anemone, anchored to a rock on a shallow reef. During the day, its tentacles wave, hunting and interacting. As the sun sets, the enemy contracts. Its tentacles curl inward and its body shrinks down. It looks like a closed flower. And studies have confirmed what our evolutionary narrative suggests. During this contracted state, if you poke the anemone, it takes longer to respond than during the day. It is in a state of lowered arousal, resting its collective cell army, preparing for the next burst of daylight activity. The rhythm had scaled up. What was once a purely chemical defense mechanism in a bacterium was now a coordinated, whole organism behavior in a brainless creature. The darkness was no longer just a break from the sun, it was a scheduled, non-negotiable window for complex maintenance. The ancient trade-off held true. Shut down the external sensors so the internal maintenance crew can work without interruption. 3. The first pause. The neuron's new role. The story moves forward, and life begins to form the first tentative knots of specialization, the nervous system. Imagine the first worms and early fish, creatures that possess a primitive brain, a small centralized bundle of nerve cells dedicated to rapid processing and movement. With the advent of the brain, the challenge of rest became exponentially more complex.
For the sea anemone, every cell was its own clock. For the worm, the rhythm needed a master conductor. If every nerve cell decided to rest at a different time, the animal would simply seize up and die. The rest had to be coordinated. Evolution's answer was the first suprachiasmatic nucleus, the SCN, the master clock. It formed near the sensory organs, close to where light signals first entered the organism. This tiny cluster of specialized cells inherited the Chi clock programming, but its job changed. It no longer just regulated itself, it regulated everything else. This master clock began to signal the difference between day and night across the entire organism, allowing the nerve cells, the hungry, energy-intensive brain cells, to run full speed during the day. And when the light faded, the master clock initiated a global state change. For the first time, sleep became a centralized phenomenon. It was no longer just about repair, it was about systematically resting the most expensive part of the body, the central processor. The nerve cells needed downtime to consolidate the day's new information, to clear out the toxic waste products that accumulate rapidly during high cognitive activity, and to literally resize the connections between them. The animal entered a new state. It was still, unresponsive, and fully dedicated to internal housekeeping. This deep, quiet state was the prototype for what you and I experience tonight. It was the brain's first decision to turn off the volume of the outside world, to disconnect from the chaos of the environment, so that it could perform the critical structural work needed for the next day. 5. The universal language of rest. From those brainless jellyfish to those first small fish, the architecture of rest proved to be the single most conserved essential process in the entire evolutionary tree. It is so essential, in fact, that if you deprive a fruit fly of its sleep, it will exhibit similar cognitive deficits to a sleep-deprived human. If you prevent a zebrafish from sleeping, it builds up the same toxic waste products that characterize neurological disorders in humans. The machinery of sleep is practically identical across nearly all species, from the most basic insect to the most complex mammal. And the reason is simple. Sleep is the tax you pay for being awake. Every moment of awareness, every synapse fired, every calorie burned creates a debt. The debt is not only in energy, but in structural integrity. Toxins build up, molecular connections fray. Memories are created, but not yet filed and secured. The moment of rest is the moment the universe demands payment. The story of the first darkness teaches us that sleep is not a luxury. It is not a flaw in the system that evolution never managed to fix. It is the sophisticated, ancient, highly conserved solution to a problem that arose 4 billion years ago. How to be a chemical engine that runs on a toxic power source without burning itself out. It is the mechanism so perfect that life simply would not have survived without it. It is literally written into your genetic code that you must enter this state of restorative darkness. And now, as you lie here, 4 billion years after the first cyanobacterium began its quiet process of repair, your body is preparing to run the exact same program. 6. Embracing the ancient code. Feel the weight of that history. You are not just a modern person with a modern problem. You are the latest, most complex expression of a universal biological imperative. Your brain, that powerful engine of thought, is now waiting for the signal to initiate the deep restorative work that has been perfected across eons. Your modern stressors, the glow of a screen, the pressure of a deadline, the noise of the city, are just tiny, superficial disruptions trying to interfere with a chemical rhythm that survived continental shifts, mass extinctions, and the rise and fall of empires. You are simply being called back to the rhythm. The master clock in your brain, the SCN, is working tonight, coordinating the slow, powerful shift. It is telling your cells, your organs, and your restless mind, the time of external labor is over. The time of internal maintenance has begun. Don't fight it. Don't chase it. Simply surrender to the ancient, proven process. Allow yourself to disconnect, just as those first cyanobacteria disconnected from the destructive energy of the sun. Allow yourself to contract, just as the sea anemone contracted in the low tide. Your survival is predicated on this rhythm. Your clarity tomorrow, your emotional balance, your very ability to create and contribute is dependent on the success of this tonight. Let the 4-billion-year-old code take over. Let the deep restorative currents of the first darkness wash over you. We are all connected by this quiet nocturnal truth. Drift now into the wisdom of the long night. Rest, repair, and we will meet again in the next chapter as we explore how the human story of sleep was shaped by fire and fear and the first communal bedtime stories around the ancestral hearth.
The hominid problem, a costly compromise. In our first journeys, we learned that rest is an ancient cellular program, a non-negotiable tax on consciousness. In our second, we discovered the ingenious compromises of the animal kingdom, the dolphin dividing its brain, and the zebra fragmenting its sleep into polyphasic naps to mitigate the risk of paralysis. Now, we arrive at the most challenging dilemma in the entire history of rest, the emergence of the hominid brain. As our primate ancestors evolved, their brains grew exponentially, demanding more energy, more complexity, and crucially, more time for deep maintenance. This new level of intelligence required the consolidation of memory, emotional processing, and synaptic reorganization on a scale never before seen. It meant the human ancestor needed to spend more time in the vulnerable, paralyzed state of REM sleep than any other primate. Herein lay the evolutionary paradox. Our most powerful tool for survival, our intelligence, demanded a period of extreme, necessary vulnerability. The brain needed long, unbroken rest, but the body was exposed in a predator-rich world. How did we solve this? How did we transition from the fragmented, high-vigilance rest of the great apes to the single, deep, prolonged night of sleep that we seek today? The answer lies in two monumental shifts in human history: the descent from the trees and the creation of community. Tonight, we follow our ancestors as they literally leave their established safety nets behind and discover a new, shared sanctuary on the ground, fundamentally redefining what it means to be safe enough to truly rest. 2. The arboreal cradle, the sleep niche. Before our ancestors became truly human, they were creatures of the canopy. For millions of years, the great apes, our cousins, utilized the most effective security system evolution had ever invented for primates: height. A chimpanzee or a gorilla does not simply fall asleep where it stands. Every evening, before sunset, they engage in a dedicated ritual: nest building. Imagine the meticulous process. High up in the safest branches, they break, weave, and bend dozens of small branches and leaves to create a sturdy, flexible platform. This platform is not just comfortable, it is an early warning system. Any predator attempting to scale the tree and access the nest would cause the branches to shudder, instantly rousing the sleeper. The nest itself is a profound piece of evolutionary architecture. Studies on wild apes show that they build a new nest almost every single night. The construction takes approximately 10 to 15 minutes and is critical to the quality of their rest. Without a well-built nest, a primate's sleep is shorter and more fragmented. However, even in the safety of the trees, the great apes still exhibit a relatively short polyphasic pattern of rest. They sleep for about 9 to 10 hours, but this time is peppered with bouts of wakefulness, maintaining a degree of vigilance. They rest, but they do so cautiously, ready to spring into action. They are perfectly adapted to the vulnerability of the forest. But this arboreal cradle was a cage for intellect. Our ancestors, as their brains continued to swell and their bodies began the long march toward bipedalism, walking on two legs, needed something more profound than safety. They needed time.
time for the brain to process the complex information they gathered while hunting, coordinating, and tool-making on the ground. The canopy was safe, but the ground was where the intellectual revolution was happening. Eventually, the promise of the plains became too great to ignore, forcing a high-risk gamble. The sleep platform had to be moved to the earth. 3. The descent to the ground, a high-risk gamble. Around 1.8 million years ago, with the emergence of Homo erectus, the first hominid to truly master the ground, the transition became unavoidable. These early humans were taller, traveled greater distances, and possessed an intelligence that dwarfed their predecessors. Their large brains demanded the deeper, longer sleep that the fragmented night in a wobbly tree nest could no longer provide. To sleep on the ground was to invite death. The savanna at night was a domain ruled by night vision predators like lions and hyenas, animals far stronger and faster than any human. A lone, paralyzed hominid was a sure victim. This existential threat forced two massive evolutionary shifts in our sleep pattern: consolidation and security. First, consolidation. The need to minimize the total amount of time spent helpless meant that Homo erectus and its descendants began to favor longer, unbroken stretches of deep, high-quality sleep. If they only had a small window of safety, they had to maximize the efficiency of that rest. This pressure helped push us toward monophasic sleep, a single, long, efficient block, even though it meant a massive commitment to vulnerability. Second, security. Since they had abandoned the physical security of the tree branches, they had to replace it with social security. They had to recreate the vigil of the herd on a much more sophisticated, intellectual level. The solution was the dawn of the permanent human campsite, a shared space where the risks of the night could be distributed and managed by the collective. This transition from the individual short nap in the tree to the communal long sleep on the ground is the single most important moment in our sleep history. It demonstrates that the invention of trust was just as vital as the invention of the wheel. But the protection of the group still wasn't enough. There was one missing ingredient that would elevate the human sleeping experience far beyond that of the vigilant zebra. That ingredient was the magic of light in the darkness. 4. The fire's guard, protection, and deep rest. The mastery of fire, possibly as early as 1 million years ago, was not just a revolution in cooking and warmth, it was the ultimate sleep innovation. Imagine that first human campsite on the ground. It is dark, the only sound the rustling grass and the distant calls of predators. The anxiety is palpable, driving the urge for fragmented, shallow sleep, just like the zebra. But now, a single element changes everything: fire.
The fire served 3 vital functions for rest: predator deterrence. Most predators, especially the largest ones, have an innate fear of fire. The flickering, unpredictable light and the acrid smoke created an invisible sensory shield around the sleeping group. This external chemical defense was far more reliable than an individual's hearing. For the first time, a large group of humans could lie down in a deep, REM-paralyzed trance and know, with a high degree of confidence, that they would be safe. The risk of the night was externalized to the glowing ring of the firelight. Extended social time. Firelight extended the day, allowing for communal interaction after the sun set. This was not time for hunting, it was time for bonding, teaching, and most important for sleep, social consolidation. The warm glow and shared security encouraged relaxation and deep trust, both critical preconditions for falling into the deep cycles of human sleep. Pathogen control. Sleeping near a fire provided a dry, warm, relatively clean environment, helping to reduce insect bites and exposure to cold, which otherwise disrupt the deep sleep cycles. With the fire acting as the ultimate sentinel, the brain finally received the signal it desperately needed: it is safe to let go.
This invention provided the necessary security for our ancestors to fully consolidate their sleep into one major block. The vulnerability was managed by the flame, allowing the intellectual engine of the hominid brain to finally get the uninterrupted maintenance it required. Our sleep became less polyphasic and more monophasic, not because our biology changed overnight, but because our environment made deep sleep suddenly achievable. The memory factory, sleep consolidation. The payoff of this consolidated, safe sleep was immense, superior intelligence. We know now that the most crucial work of the brain, the reorganization and filing of complex associative memories, occurs during the deepest phases of sleep. Homo erectus was not just processing physical sensations, they were processing knowledge, where the best stones for tools were located, the migration patterns of animals, the complex dynamics of group hierarchy. This information overload demanded a greater proportion of REM sleep than any of their primate relatives. During the long, deep sleep next to the communal fire, the brain could engage in synaptic pruning. Think of this like a gardener tending a vast hedge. The brain cuts back the weak, unnecessary connections made during the day, reinforcing the vital ones. This process clears the slate for new learning and sharpens cognitive function. The ability to successfully enter this long, uninterrupted period of deep rest became a key driver of human evolutionary success. The humans who rested best were the ones who remembered the best hunting strategies, organized the most effective defenses, and ultimately survived. The single block sleep we inherited is not a mistake or a recent invention. It is a biological luxury purchased by the dual security of fire and community. We sleep long and deep because, once upon a time, our collective genius made it safe to do so. The quiet comfort of the modern camp. Now, bring that journey back to your modern bedroom. The security you feel tonight, the locking door, the thick walls, the absence of lurking danger, is the direct continuation of the fire pit. Your modern sanctuary is the ultimate evolution of the communal campsite. You have externalized the vigilance to the safety of your home, allowing your highly complex modern brain the deep, uninterrupted rest it deserves. The gentle glow of a nightlight, the white noise of a fan, the comforting presence of a partner or a pet, these are the echoes of the sentinel's watch, the crackle of the fire, and the reassuring presence of the herd gathered around the warmth. Your long, monophasic rest is a trophy of human civilization, a testament to the fact that we chose knowledge over perpetual vigilance. We chose deep connection over lonely alertness. Tonight, as you feel yourself settling deeper into the mattress, embrace the comfort of this ancient human contract. You are safe. The intelligence that made us human now demands its period of profound maintenance. Allow the brain to begin its meticulous, deep work. Let the memory factory run its course. Trust the comfort of your sanctuary. In our next chapter, we will explore the last great sleep disruption before the modern era, the loss of the biphasic night and the cultural shift towards segmented sleep in medieval and pre-industrial history. Rest now in the light of the fire's ancient guard.
1. The contract sealed, replacing the canopy. In our last chapter, we traced the high-stakes moment of human evolution, the shift from the secure, fragmented rest of the trees to the vulnerable, ground-level sleep of the early hominids. We understood that our massive, complex brains required long, uninterrupted periods of deep rest, a single, monophasic block. But this required a level of external security unprecedented in the animal kingdom. The threat was real, primal, and immediate. To be still on the savanna at night meant to risk everything. The only security the early human possessed was the collective strength of the group. But even the strongest herd cannot stand guard all night against the silent, camouflaged hunter. The solution, which allowed human culture to truly ignite and our sleep to become truly restorative, was not biological. It was technological. It was the mastery of the single most transformative element in human history: fire. Fire was not merely a source of heat. It was the first engineered sleep aid, the oldest alarm system, and the original stage for the stories that would calm our hearts and bind us together. Tonight, we settle down by that ancestral hearth. We listen to the rhythm of the crackling wood, feel the warmth on our skin, and understand how the flickering light sealed the contract that allowed the human species to finally, truly let go and enter the long night of deep sleep. 2. The physical perimeter, a sensory shield. Imagine the scene at dusk, hundreds of thousands of years ago. The air is cooling rapidly, and the shadows are lengthening, transforming familiar shapes into looming threats. The group settles into their crude shelter or cave entrance. Their instincts are still screaming for vigilance, inherited from millions of years of life as prey. But one thing is different: the fire. The fire provided an immediate, three-pronged defense that satisfied the most primal anxiety of the resting brain. First, the light. For a creature that evolved to hunt and observe primarily during the day, the night is a sensory blackout. But for predators, the flickering, dancing light of the fire is terrifying. It is unpredictable and chaotic. Animals rely on consistent patterns. The sudden, chaotic movement of the flames signals danger and instability. A lion may approach the scent of prey, but the light barrier is usually enough to stop it cold. Second, the smoke. The acrid, biting smoke provided a crucial chemical shield. It masked the human scent, making it harder for nocturnal predators to track or locate the sleeping group. It also irritated their eyes and lungs, acting as a passive deterrent that required no human action to maintain. Third, the sound. The rhythmic, predictable sound of the crackling logs and the gentle roar of the flame created a continuous, low-level sound envelope. This wasn't just white noise. It was known safety. It allowed the brain to filter out the small, unsettling sounds of the wilderness, the snapping twig, the distant howl, because the central sound source was known and benign. Together, these three elements created the first truly safe sleep environment on the ground. The hominids could rely on a non-living entity to hold the vigil, freeing their own minds to descend into the profound, paralyzed state of REM sleep necessary for intellectual survival. The fire was the sentinel that never needed to blink. 3. The thermal bridge to deep sleep. Beyond protection, fire solved another critical biological problem for our ancestors: thermal regulation. The human body is exquisitely sensitive to temperature. One of the first and most critical signals our body sends to initiate sleep is a slight drop in core temperature. We cool down to sleep, and we warm up to wake. However, once asleep, maintaining that optimum temperature is vital, especially when lying exposed on the cold ground during the cool hours before dawn. If the body gets too cold, the brain has a physiological emergency response. It inhibits the deepest, most restorative stages of sleep, stage 3 and REM, and initiates shivering or muscle tension to create heat. The sleeper is constantly fighting to maintain temperature, resulting in fragmented, shallow, and ineffective rest. By ensuring a consistent, warm boundary,
The fire allowed the hominid brain to complete its high-level maintenance without interruption. The deeper the rest, the clearer the mind the next day. The warmer the night, the longer and more efficient the sleep. The fire was the thermal bridge that allowed our intelligence to flourish. 4. The invention of bedtime, calm, and connection. Now we move from the physical utility of fire to its profound cultural and psychological role, the invention of bedtime. The hours between the sun setting and the group finally succumbing to sleep became the most socially important period of the human day. This was the time around the hearth, illuminated by the low communal glow.
During the day, humans were scattered, hunting, gathering, and performing individual tasks. Around the fire, they were reintegrated. The activities during this period were deeply calming and sleep-conducive. 1. Grooming and touch. The slow, repetitive acts of physical grooming, removing thorns or sharing food, reinforced social bonds and triggered the release of oxytocin, the cuddle hormone, which acts as a powerful anti-anxiety agent, signaling to the nervous system that the individual is deeply connected and safe within the group. 2. Shared meals. Cooking food over the fire made it easier to digest, meaning the body didn't have to work as hard during sleep. The shared warm meal further cemented the communal feeling of security. 3. The shift to narrative. Crucially, the firelight became the stage for the first communal bedtime stories. The stories were not just entertainment, they served vital evolutionary functions for sleep. They taught survival lessons, shared the knowledge of the elders, and most importantly, they provided a shared, predictable narrative structure. Listening to the voice of a trusted group member, the slow cadence of the language, is inherently calming. It moves the restless individual mind away from its own worries and into a collective shared reality. The stories were a ritualized way of unloading the day's stress and reinforcing the central truth: we are safe together. This hour around the fire was the first step in creating a psychological transition to sleep, a conscious shift from the high vigilance of the day to the surrender of the night. 5. The genetic legacy of the storyteller. The impact of these firelit stories goes deeper than just feeling sleepy. They fundamentally changed the biological prerequisites for human rest. In the previous animal kingdom, the sleep trigger was purely external, darkness, or metabolic, tiredness. For humans around the fire, a new trigger was added: social and emotional calm. When the brain hears a story in the safe context of the firelight, it recognizes a pattern of security. The narrative voice overrides the primal, hypervigilant parts of the brain, the amygdala, the fear center. If the storyteller is calm, the listener is calm. If the group is still, the individual feels empowered to be still. This communal ritual became so genetically embedded that even today, the sound of a calm, trusted voice, whether from a narrator in an audiobook, a partner reading aloud, or a guided meditation, is one of the most effective tools for inducing sleep. Your adult brain still recognizes this sound as the ancient signal: the fire is lit, the tribe is safe, you may rest. The fire's embrace gave us the time to develop high REM sleep cycles, which are associated with creativity, foresight, and complex problem solving. It is not an exaggeration to say that the intelligence that built civilization was forged in the firelight during the deep, protected rest that followed the evening's communal storytelling. 6. Embracing the hearth tonight. Tonight, as you lie in your modern sanctuary, think of the vast distance we have traveled from the anxious, short sleep of the apes to the consolidated rest you are seeking. You don't need to tend a flame or fear a hyena, but you can still embrace the fundamental lessons of the hearth. 1. Seek the perimeter. Trust the safety of your environment.
Let your locked doors and darkened rooms stand as the impenetrable shield of the ancient fire. 2. Embrace the ritual. Create your own modern time around the hearth. Whether it's reading a book, listening to a soothing voice, or simply sharing a quiet moment with loved ones, dedicate the last hour before sleep to acts of social and emotional integration. 3. Find the calm voice. When your mind spins with the day's worries, remember the storyteller. Seek the narrative rhythm, the calming voice that signals safety and allows your brain to transition from the external work of the day to the deep internal maintenance of the night. The fire is long extinguished, but its legacy of warmth, security, and shared peace lives within your rhythm. Let that ancient comfort settle over you now. In our next chapter, we will encounter the first major cultural shift in human sleep, exploring the common and now nearly lost practice of biphasic sleep, the two-part night that dominated the world before the industrial age. Rest now in the enduring warmth of the fire's embrace.
1. The call to the interior. We have traveled from the first microbial cell to the firelit circle of our ancestors. We understand that sleep is a survival strategy, an ancient contract written in the fundamental rules of life. To rest is to survive. Now, as you lie here, safe and warm in your modern sanctuary, we turn our gaze inward. We enter the most mysterious, private, and breathtaking landscape of all, the interior architecture of the sleeping brain. Why is this necessary? Why, after securing the perimeter with fire and community, does the brain engage in a dramatic, systematic shutdown that renders us motionless and unresponsive for hours? The answer is complex, but the feeling is simple. We shut down because we must build. The brain is the most expensive organ in the body, demanding about 20% of your total energy supply. When you are awake, your brain is a relentless city. Lights are always on, traffic is heavy, and the power grid is constantly strained. Sleep is the moment the brain finally closes the external gates of that city, the sensory inputs of sight, sound, and touch, to dedicate its resources entirely to construction, maintenance, and archiving. It transitions from being a tool for interacting with the world to a workshop for perfecting itself. Tonight, we will explore the rhythmic, cyclical shifts the brain undergoes. We will see how every minute of rest is a precisely choreographed dance between two profoundly different states, the quiet consolidation of non-REM and the vibrant theater of REM, each essential for preparing you for the mental, emotional, and creative challenges of tomorrow. 2. The twilight transition. As you begin to settle, the first act of the night begins subtly. We move past the state of wakefulness and into the quiet threshold of non-REM, or NREM, sleep. Your body is still, your breathing is slow and even. This is the moment your brainwave activity shifts from the fast, jagged waves of alertness, known as beta waves, to the gentler, rhythmic pulses of alpha waves, the waves of quiet contemplation and relaxation. You might experience the brief, floating sense of drifting, or perhaps a sudden, harmless jolt as your muscles relax completely, a brief farewell from your motor system. Then you enter NREM Stage 1, or N1, the lightest stage of sleep. This is often described as the twilight zone, the dozing phase. If someone were to call your name right now, you would probably insist you weren't asleep at all. Your brainwave activity slows further into theta waves. This stage lasts only a few minutes, acting as a gentle ramp down into deeper rest. Next comes NREM Stage 2, or N2. This is where true sleep begins, occupying about half of your total night. Your heart rate slows, your muscles fully relax, and your core body temperature begins its crucial descent. Critically, the brain begins to exhibit two remarkable features that signal a serious commitment to rest: sleep spindles and K complexes.
Sleep spindles are brief, rapid bursts of brainwave activity that scientists believe act as a sensory gate. They actively inhibit the brain's response to external noise, literally muffling the sounds of the world so you can stay asleep. K-complexes are sharp, dramatic peaks in brainwave activity, often triggered by a sudden, mild internal or external stimulus. They are thought to be the brain's internal monitoring system, ensuring that the sound isn't dangerous enough to merit full wakefulness. N2 is the secure waiting room, a state where the brain is actively maintaining its status as asleep. 3. The deep dive, the cleansing wave. After about 45 to 60 minutes, the brain commits fully, descending into the most physically and neurologically restorative haze of the night, NREM Stage 3, or N3, often called deep sleep or slow wave sleep, SWS. In this stage, the brain begins to pulse with the slowest, largest waves seen all night, delta waves. Deep sleep is the body's chance to rebuild. Every system downshifts to its lowest point. Metabolism slows, blood pressure drops, and the pituitary gland releases a powerful surge of growth hormone. This hormone is the ultimate restorer, initiating cellular repair, bone growth, and muscle recovery throughout the entire body. But the most breathtaking work happens in the brain. During N3, the brain's glymphatic system, often called the brain's waste disposal system, goes into overdrive. Think of your brain cells as tireless workers during the day, producing waste products and toxins. Chief among these is amyloid beta, a toxic protein that, if allowed to accumulate, is associated with neurological decline. During wakefulness, the channels around your brain cells are tight, restricting the flow of fluid. But in deep sleep, your brain cells literally shrink by up to 60%, creating wide-open channels between them. Cerebrospinal fluid, the brain's cleansing solution, rushes through these channels, washing away the accumulated toxins like a powerful nocturnal tide. Deep sleep is not rest, it is a vigorous chemical cleansing. It is the non-negotiable molecular housekeeping that prevents the toxic buildup created by consciousness. Without this stage, the brain cannot clear the slate. This is the ultimate fulfillment of the 4-billion-year-old cellular imperative. Stop output to enable maintenance. You spend most of your N3 time in the first 3 hours of the night. This phase is non-negotiable for physical and neurological health. It is the solid foundation upon which all other rest is built. 4. The architect of memory, emotional pruning. Once the brain has completed its physical cleansing and the initial delta wave cycle, the architecture of sleep shifts dramatically. We transition from the quiet depths of NREM into the vibrant, paradoxical landscape of REM sleep, rapid eye movement. The term paradoxical is used because while the body is in a state of full muscle paralysis, the brain activity, beta and alpha waves, mimics that of a wide-awake, focused mind. The engine is roaring, but the car is in park. REM sleep is the emotional and memory workshop. While NREM handles the foundational, factual, and physical data, the what and where of your day, REM handles the emotional resonance, the how it felt and why it mattered.
During REM, the brain reruns the most emotionally charged events of the previous day, but with a crucial difference. The norepinephrine chemical, a key stress hormone, is almost completely shut off. This process is sometimes called emotional pruning or memory consolidation without stress. The brain can revisit a stressful conversation, a frustrating challenge, or an upsetting event, process it, categorize it, and file it away for future learning, all without re-experiencing the corrosive, damaging neurochemistry of stress. Think of it as therapy conducted by your own sleeping mind. This is why, after a stressful day, you often find that the problem that seems so overwhelming at midnight feels solvable or less significant by 6 a.m. Your brain didn't forget the problem.
It processed the emotional edge off the memory and integrated the lesson without the burden of the original trauma. REM sleep is the birthplace of dreams, the vibrant, often surreal narratives that allow the brain to test and discard scenarios, integrating new knowledge into existing frameworks. The stories you dream are not random. They are the highly creative, associative work of an intelligent mind working rapidly to make sense of its world. 5. The sleep cycle, a journey repeated. The genius of sleep architecture is that it is not a linear process, it is a cycle. Every night, your brain moves through these stages, N1, N2, N3, and then REM, in a precise 90 to 110-minute loop. Over the course of a healthy night, you will repeat this cycle 4 to 6 times. But the composition of the cycle changes profoundly as the night progresses. Early night, first 3 cycles, are dominated by deep sleep, N3. This is when the crucial physical and toxic cleansing occurs. It is the foundation. Late night, last 3 cycles, are dominated by REM and lighter N2 sleep. The REM periods grow longer and more intense, with the final REM cycle, just before waking, often lasting 45 minutes or more. This is when the crucial emotional and creative work takes place. This means that all hours of sleep are not equal. The hour of sleep you get between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. is neurologically different and irreplaceable compared to the hour of sleep you get between 5 a.m. and 6 a.m. Miss the early hours and you compromise physical repair. Miss the later hours and you compromise emotional clarity and memory integration. The architecture of sleep is a perfect time-released medicine. It dedicates the first part of the night to the heavy-duty physical maintenance inherited from our microbial ancestors, and the second part of the night to the complex, emotional, and creative maintenance required by our sophisticated human consciousness. 6. The gift of surrender. Tonight, as you feel yourself drift, remember the profound, intricate choreography happening within your own mind. You are not simply passive, you are actively engaging in the most complex repair program known to science. You are giving your body and mind the only thing that cannot generate while awake, the permission to shut down the external world and work relentlessly on the internal. Your memories are being filed, your toxins are being washed away, your emotions are being pruned, integrated, and understood without the harsh edge of stress. Your muscles are rebuilding. This organized descent into unconsciousness is the ultimate act of trust in your own biology. You are trusting the 4-billion-year-old program to run its course successfully. The architecture of dreams is not a fleeting state. It is the fundamental process that ensures your physical health, your emotional resilience, and your intellectual capacity to meet the challenges of the coming day. In our next chapter, we will leave the deep evolutionary past and enter recorded history, exploring the fascinating cultural practice of biphasic sleep, the 2-part night that our ancestors enjoyed before the coming of industrialization. Let the deep currents of N3 wash over you. Let the subtle narratives of REM unfold. Rest deeply in the knowledge that you are shutting down only so that you can become stronger. 1. The written night, seeking meaning in the dark. We have sailed through the deep currents of evolution, from the cleansing wave of the first microbial sleep to the communal safety of the ancestral fire. We know now that our night is defined by a non-negotiable chemical demand for rest. But as human intellect continued its ascent, something changed. When our ancestors began to write, to build cities, and to organize belief systems, the need for rest acquired a new dimension, meaning. The night was no longer just a period of survival. It was a vast, mysterious canvas where the rules of the waking world dissolved. It was a space that demanded interpretation. What were these moving, vibrant narratives that arrived during the deepest paralysis of REM sleep? Why did some dreams feel prophetic, others healing, and others terrifying?
The great civilizations of Greece and Rome were the first to codify these questions, not with science, but with mythology and reverence. They looked beyond the biological necessity and decided that sleep must be a divine domain, controlled by deities who mediated between the mortal world and the unknown. Tonight, we step into the marble temples and quiet groves of ancient antiquity. We will meet the gods who governed the dark and explore the most profound ritual of rest, the practice of incubation, where people deliberately sought sleep not for rest, but for a sacred vision that could change their fate. 2. Hypnos and Thanatos, the gentle and the final sleep. In the Greek world, the personification of sleep was Hypnos, later adopted by the Romans as Somnus. His lineage immediately established the profound, unsettling nature of rest. Hypnos was the son of Nyx, night, and the twin brother of Thanatos, death. This sibling relationship defined the ancient understanding of sleep. Sleep was not a separate state from death, but rather its gentle rehearsal, a temporary, lesser death. Think of the visual representation. Hypnos was often depicted as a beautiful, winged youth, sometimes carrying a poppy or a horn dripping with the waters of forgetfulness. He moved quietly, spreading slumber across the world with a touch of his wand or a sprinkle of dew. He was benevolent, necessary, and ultimately a relief from the exhaustion of the day. Thanatos, on the other hand, was sharp, uncompromising, and final. The contrast offers a deep comfort. Hypnos was the guarantee that every surrender to the darkness would be temporary. He was the promise of reawakening. When the ancients went to sleep, they were comforted by the mythological truth that the oblivion of the night was managed by a god who chose to release them back to the light, unlike his twin brother, who offered no return. This mythology served a crucial psychological function. It provided a narrative for vulnerability. The ancient Greek warrior, knowing he must give himself over to the paralyzing embrace of Hypnos, did so within a recognized divine order. The risk of the night was not random chaos, it was a regulated state of being. Hypnos was said to live in a dark, silent cave in the underworld, where the sun never shone. Rivers flowed past his domain, the river Lethe, forgetfulness, and the river of oblivion, and at the cave's entrance grew sleep-inducing plants. This description is the first great metaphorical image of our need for a controlled environment, a place of darkness, silence, and chemical aid, the herbs, where the noise of the world is deliberately forgotten. 3. The House of Dreams, Morpheus and the Oneiroi. If Hypnos governed the state of sleep, his sons governed its content, the Oneiroi, dreams. Chief among these dream shapers was Morpheus. Morpheus was literally the shaper. His role was to appear to mortals in the exact form of a person they knew, a friend, a general, a lover, carrying a message or a warning. He was the god of human form and narrative. His brothers, Phobotor and Phantasos, handled the rest of the dream landscape. Phobotor specialized in fears, the terrifying beasts and shapeless horrors that stalked the nightmares. He was the personification of the brain's need to process threats in a safe, stress-free environment, as we discussed in the last chapter. Phantasos specialized in objects, landscapes, and surreal non-human imagery, the swirling colors and strange geographies of abstract thought. This mythological structure suggests that the Greeks understood the multifaceted nature of the dreaming brain. They recognized that dreams were not one thing, but a collection of psychological processes. 1. Morpheus narrative processing, dealing with social complexities and personal interactions. 2. Phobotor threat processing, rehearsing danger and coping with anxiety. 3. Phantasos abstract processing, engaging the subconscious mind with creative, non-linear ideas. This mythology gave the individual listener a powerful framework for interpreting their own nocturnal experiences. A dream from Morpheus was serious and personal. A dream from Phobotor was a warning to be cautious, and a dream from Phantasos was simply the beautiful, confusing swirl of the subconscious mind.
By assigning these distinct roles, the ancients began the practice of finding meaning in the chaotic narratives of REM sleep, connecting their dreams to their waking lives. 4. Incubation, sleeping for a cure. The most fascinating application of sleep in ancient Greece and Rome was the religious and medical practice of incubation, from the Latin incubare, meaning to lie upon. Incubation was the deliberate act of seeking sleep within a sacred space, a temple, for the express purpose of receiving a divine message, usually a cure for illness or a prophecy for the future. The most famous of these temples belonged to Asclepius, the Greek god of medicine and healing. People from across the ancient world, the sick, the weary, the desperate, would travel to the Asclepiae, temples dedicated to Asclepius.
The ritual was meticulously planned. 1. Purification. The supplicant would first undergo rituals of purification, bathing, fasting, and sacrificing to the gods to prepare their body and mind. This process was, in effect, a powerful physiological and psychological preparation for deep rest, aligning with modern sleep hygiene practices. 2. Preparation. They would lie down in a special dormitory called the abaton, often surrounded by non-venomous snakes, the symbol of Asclepius and medicine, still seen today. The atmosphere was one of profound quiet, expectation, and sanctity. 3. The dream state. The person would then enter the sacred sleep. They were not seeking a natural dream, but an epiphany, a healing vision sent directly by Asclepius. This dream might include the god himself appearing and touching the affected area, or it might be a practical instruction: go drink from this spring, or mix these herbs. When the supplicant awoke, they would immediately relate the dream to a temple priest, who acted as an interpreter. The priest would help turn the mystical content of the dream into a practical, actionable prescription. This system was an extraordinary integration of mind and body. The process of purification and fasting put the body into a vulnerable, receptive state, making the transition to deep sleep easier. The expectation of a divine cure powerfully focused the subconscious mind. The entire ritual was designed to harness the brain's deepest, most creative and emotional stage of rest, REM sleep, and translate its symbolic content into a framework for healing. The success of the Asclepiae lay in the placebo effect, the profound power of belief, and the fact that deep restorative sleep itself is one of the most effective healing mechanisms the body possesses. They had ritualized the body's innate capacity for repair. By seeking sleep in the temple of Hypnos, they were receiving the gift of Asclepius. 5. Somnus and the Roman pragmatism. When the Roman Republic absorbed the Greek pantheon, Hypnos became Somnus, and the approach to sleep, like most things Roman, became more pragmatic and less mystical. While the Romans adopted the Asclepia, renaming Asclepius to Asclepius, their primary focus on sleep was often less about divine prophecy and more about efficiency, order, and physical recovery, a nod to the relentless demands of building and maintaining an empire. The Roman military leaders and engineers valued rest as a strategic asset. A well-rested legion was a successful legion. Their military codes often contained explicit instructions regarding mandatory rest periods, recognizing that sleep deprivation was a tactical weakness. This shift mirrors the difference between Greek philosophical inquiry and Roman engineering. Greek sleep, a quest for inner meaning and divine insight. Roman sleep, a critical component of physical and political function. The Romans were masters of the physical world. Their luxury beds, lectus, were elaborate, often made of bronze and adorned with expensive fabrics, a clear recognition that the quality of the sleep environment was essential for the recovery of the citizen. The wealthy also embraced the meridian, the midday nap or siesta,
recognizing the physiological need to break the long, hot day with a period of rest. The Roman approach reminds us that the best sleep is achieved when it is viewed not as a passive state, but as a necessary component of productivity and strength. Even when they removed the mystical element, they honored the power of rest. They understood that the mind that sleeps well is the mind that conquers. 6. The enduring legacy of trust. Tonight, as you prepare to cross your own threshold into the night, think of the legacy of Hypnos. You may not be seeking a cure from a divine God, but you are still seeking restoration. You are still seeking the wisdom of your deepest mind. The ancients teach us two critical lessons. 1. Ritual is power. The purification and preparation rituals of the Asclepiaea remind us that a dedicated wind-down routine, the bath, the quiet reading, the intentional forgetting of the day's chaos is the gateway to profound rest. 2. Trust the narrative. When the strange, vibrant stories of Morpheus and his brothers begin, remember that they are the essential, emotional labor of the brain. You don't need to interpret them literally, but you can trust them as evidence that your mind is working diligently, processing stress, and preparing you for emotional clarity tomorrow. Allow the gentle hand of Hypnos to spread its comfort over you now. Trust that the surrender to the darkness is not vulnerability, but a necessary passage into the most profound, ancient wisdom of the self. In our next chapter, we will fully enter the history of the biphasic night, the centuries where humans commonly slept in two distinct blocks, a pattern lost to modern life. Rest deeply with the quiet confidence of the ancients.
1. The tyranny of the 8-hour block. We live in a world obsessed with a single metric of rest, the 8-hour night. We treat this as a universal, non-negotiable biological law. We measure our success against it, and we judge our failures by the absence of this unbroken block of slumber. If our sleep is interrupted, if we wake in the deep quiet of the night and find ourselves staring at the ceiling, we often feel frustration, worry, and the modern anxiety that we are somehow failing at rest. We panic, trying desperately to force ourselves back into that single, solid state of unconsciousness. But tonight, we pause that panic. We learn that this single, unbroken 8-hour night is not a natural inheritance from the firelit savanna. It is, in fact, a remarkably recent invention, a product of artificial light and industrial schedules. For most of recorded human history and across many cultures, sleep was not a single solid state. It was a divided experience, a mosaic of rest, ritual, and brief wakefulness. Tonight, we journey into the centuries before the Industrial Revolution, where our ancestors practiced the biphasic night, a two-part slumber with a conscious restorative hour in between. We will explore how this pattern worked and why its loss is one of the most profound yet forgotten disruptions to human rest. Our goal is not to force this old pattern upon ourselves, but to find comfort in its existence, to understand that if you wake in the middle of the night, you are not abnormal. You are simply connecting with the ancient, successful rhythm of the human past. 2. The great evidence. First sleep and second sleep. The discovery of biphasic sleep as a historical norm came largely through the work of historians who realized that references to the night in pre-industrial literature simply didn't match our modern experience.
across diaries, court records, medical books, and literature from ancient Rome through the early 1800s in Europe, Asia, and Africa, people routinely referred to the first sleep and the second sleep. For example, in the literature of the medieval period, it was common for characters to be described as waking after their first sleep to attend to chores, visit a neighbor, or engage in quiet study. Geoffrey Chaucer in the Canterbury Tales refers to a character rousing after the first sleep. This was not insomnia, it was simply life. The pattern unfolded something like this. First sleep, beginning shortly after sunset and lasting for about 3 to 4 hours. This was typically the deepest, most physically restorative sleep, often containing the majority of the delta wave, and 3, deep sleep, we discussed in the last chapter. It was the period of core physical repair. The waking hour, the watch, a period of wakefulness usually lasting 1 to 2 hours in the deep quiet of the midnight. Second sleep, beginning after the waking hour, lasting until dawn. This sleep was typically lighter, richer in REM, and focused more on emotional and cognitive consolidation. The key to this pattern is that the waking period was not a time of anxiety. It was a time of productive, quiet wakefulness. The darkness was a natural boundary, and the hour belonged solely to the individual and their close companions. From a biological perspective, this rhythm makes profound sense. When we are exposed only to natural light cues, which was the case before the 17th century, the body naturally produces a small, gentle surge of the hormone prolactin in the middle of the night. Prolactin is often associated with calmness, nurturing, and relaxation. This gentle hormonal peak may have served as the evolutionary cue to wake up, stretch, and engage in quiet, non-stressful activity before sinking back into the lighter, dream-rich second sleep. Our modern anxiety about waking up at 3 a.m. is a modern construct. For thousands of years, to wake during that quiet hour was simply the natural rhythm of the human brain responding to the changing light and chemistry of the long night. 3. The rituals of the mid-watch. What did people do during that quiet, waking hour between the two sleeps? They did things that benefited from quiet, uninterrupted time, activities that required thought, intimacy, or preparation, but not the energy of daylight. Domestic and quiet work. For the working classes, this was a moment to prepare for the morning rush. Farmers might check livestock, women might knead bread, mend clothes, or perform simple chores by the dim light of an oil lamp or the coals of the hearth. Crucially, they did this without hurry. It was a time of efficiency, not exhaustion. Spiritual and intellectual reflection. For the more educated, the waking hour was sacred intellectual time. It was considered the best time for meditation, prayer, and quiet reading. The mind, having cleared the heavy cobwebs of the first sleep, was refreshed, yet the world was still silent. There were no distractions, no visitors, no demands. Many ancient philosophers and scholars praised the clarity and insight that came during this watch hour. Monks often rose to pray during this time, marking the divine hours. Intimacy and social bonding. The waking hour was also a period of profound social intimacy. Couples would talk, share thoughts, or engage in sexual relations, a practical and comfortable rhythm before the second sleep. Family members might sit together and share hushed stories. It was a time of deep horizontal connection, reinforcing the communal safety that our ancestors discovered around the fire. The modern mind, used to a rigid schedule, views sleep as a time lost to productivity. The biphasic world viewed the waking hour as a time gained, a period of serene, dedicated stillness that allowed for the kind of personal and spiritual work that was impossible during the chaotic, social hours of the day. This segment of the night was governed by intention, not by panic. If you woke up, you didn't fight the wakefulness, you utilized it, knowing that the second sleep would arrive naturally when the brain was done with its quiet reflection. 4. The midday pause, the art of the siesta. The biphasic night was complemented in many cultures by another rhythm, the midday rest, or the siesta. While segmented sleep addressed the demands of the night, the siesta addressed the realities of the day, particularly in environments shaped by intense heat. The word siesta comes from the Latin hora sexta, or the sixth hour, referring to the hour around noon. In ancient Rome and throughout the Mediterranean, the midday nap was a biological necessity. When the sun reaches its highest point, the combination of environmental heat and a post-lunch dip in blood sugar and energy, the natural ultradian rhythm that dictates our alertness, creates a massive physiological hurdle. To continue working aggressively in the heat would be unproductive and dangerous.
The siesta was not laziness, it was strategic efficiency. By shutting down for an hour or two during the fiercest part of the day, people preserved energy, cooled their bodies, and ensured their minds were sharp for the remaining productive hours of the late afternoon and evening. This polyphasic habit, two main periods of nocturnal rest coupled with a midday rest, created a pattern of flexibility and responsiveness to both the environment and the body's natural needs. It acknowledged that the human energy curve is not flat, it dips, and those dips should be respected, not ignored. The persistence of the siesta in many cultures today, though often compressed and rushed, is a testament to its deep physiological roots. It speaks to the ultradian cycle, the 90 to 120-minute rhythm of alertness and fatigue that runs throughout our day. Our brain is programmed to need a pause, a moment to reset after every few hours of intense focus. The siesta simply provided a culturally acceptable, dedicated container for that necessary reset. 5. The lights come up, the death of the two sleeps. If segmented sleep was the historical norm, what killed it? The answer is simple, powerful, and relentless: light and schedules. Beginning with the widespread use of cheap, bright artificial lighting, candles, then gaslight, then the electric bulb, in the 17th to 19th centuries, the night ceased to be a natural boundary. People began to extend their active hours, pushing the first sleep later and later. If you don't go to bed until midnight, you can no longer afford to wake for 2 hours at 3 a.m. and expect to get 8 hours of rest before the work schedule begins at 7 a.m. The final blow was the Industrial Revolution and the rigid time clock schedule of the factory. Work was no longer dictated by the sun, but by the steam engine and the shift bell. A boss could not tolerate workers arriving mid-morning because they had enjoyed a quiet waking hour. The segmented night became incompatible with industrial economic efficiency. The human mind, adapting to this relentless new pressure, compressed its natural biphasic pattern into the single, monophasic block we know today. The waking hour was redefined as insomnia, and the siesta became laziness. We successfully trained our bodies out of the two-part sleep, but in doing so, we created the modern anxiety that comes when the ancient rhythm, that subtle midnight prolactin surge, tries to reassert itself. 6. Finding comfort in the ancient rhythm.
Tonight, as you lie here, feel the comfort of this history. If you wake in the middle of the night, if your mind is quiet but awake, do not panic. You are not broken. You are simply remembering an ancient, functional pattern of human rest. You are experiencing the watch hour, a time once dedicated to prayer, reflection, intimacy, and quiet work. Instead of battling it, you can simply acknowledge it. Turn away from the bright screen which signals to your brain that it is morning. Embrace the darkness. If wakefulness persists, allow yourself a few minutes of quiet, non-stressful contemplation, a mental inventory, a quiet meditation, and trust that the second sleep, the REM-rich, lighter, emotional rest, will come when your brain has completed its quiet tasks. The lost art of the siesta and the two sleeps reminds us that rest is flexible. It is not a fixed single effort, but a dynamic pattern of engagement and surrender. In our next chapter, we will continue our journey through time, exploring how ancient civilizations viewed the physical necessity of the bed itself, examining the silk pillow, sleep in imperial dynasties. Drift now into the flexible, forgiving rhythm of the human past, rest.
Sleep as a symbol of state. We have now traveled through billions of years of sleep evolution, from the molecular clock of the cyanobacteria to the collective safety of the firelit human camp. We learned that rest is a necessary defense against toxins and a non-negotiable requirement for memory. But once civilization emerged, powerful kings and emperors introduced a new element, optimization. For rulers, sleep was no longer just survival, it was a matter of state. A rested pharaoh or a clear-minded emperor meant stability for millions. The quality of rest became a symbol of power, wealth, and spiritual alignment. When every need, food, clothing, defense, was met, the ultimate luxury became the perfect, undisturbed night. This pursuit of perfection led to the development of elaborate sleep rituals, complex bedroom designs, and sophisticated herbal pharmacopoeia, practices that were often reserved only for the elite, but whose core principles still guide our modern search for the perfect bedroom. Tonight, we step behind the thick stone walls of the most ancient and powerful dynasties, Egypt and China, to understand how imperial rulers prepared themselves for the ultimate surrender to the night. We will see that true luxury in sleep is not about softness, but about precise control of the sleep environment. 2. Ancient Egypt, the celestial journey. We begin our journey in the Nile Valley, where the ritual of sleep was deeply entwined with the journey of the sun god Ra. For the pharaoh, sleep was not a passive state of rest, but an active participation in the cosmic order. Each night, the sun god Ra descended into the underworld to battle the forces of chaos, Apap, before being reborn at dawn. When the pharaoh slept, his spirit was believed to travel with Ra, ensuring the sun's return and the continuation of order, Ma'at, for all of Egypt. Therefore, the pharaoh's rest had to be ritualistically pure and secure, not just for his health, but for the entire kingdom. The Egyptian bed itself was a stark contrast to our modern expectations. The elevated platform. Beds were often simple wooden frames, elevated high off the ground. This served a practical purpose, protection from insects and cold, but also a symbolic one, raising the sleeper closer to the divine plane and away from the chaos of the earth. The most luxurious beds were inlaid with gold, ebony, and semi-precious stones. The pillow of necessity. Most striking was the Egyptian pillow. It was not a soft cushion at all, but a rigid, carved headrest made of wood, stone, or sometimes ivory. This U-shaped rest provided neck support and, crucially, kept the head cool and slightly elevated, a necessity in the hot, humid climate. It was designed to preserve the elaborate, scented wigs and prevent sweat from disrupting rest.
The comfort was not in the softness, but in the precision of support and cooling. A lesson modern science is rediscovering with cooling pillows and ergonomic neck supports. The power of scent. The Egyptians were masters of scent. The temple priests would burn kefi, a complex, sweet-smelling incense made of myrrh, honey, wine, and various botanicals. Kefi was used to purify the air, calm the spirit, and assist the transition to sleep. This use of aromatherapy was a deliberate pharmacological intervention, soothing the nervous system and signaling to the brain that the transition to the sacred night had begun. The pharaoh's last sensory input was a deliberate, complex perfume designed for tranquility. For the pharaoh, sleep was an active, spiritual journey, made possible by a physically cool, elevated, and ritually scented environment, ensuring his return at dawn alongside the sun. 3. Imperial China. The Jade Pillow and Qi. We move now across the continent to Imperial China, where the pursuit of optimal sleep was not just spiritual, but deeply rooted in the philosophy of Yang Sung, nourishing life, and the balance of vital energy, or qi. For the emperors of the Ming and Qing dynasties, longevity and intellectual clarity were paramount. The bedroom was viewed as a sacred space where the body rebalanced the flow of the 5 elements and protected the shen, or the spirit or mind. The pillow of precision. The Chinese imperial pillow, which gives this chapter its name, was rigid. Far from silk being the content, silk was the cover. The pillow itself was often 1. Buckwheat or millet, filled with dried grains to create a cool, firm, contoured surface. 2. Ceramic or porcelain, hard, smooth blocks designed to draw heat away from the head and neck, preventing restlessness. 3. Jade, the ultimate luxury. The empress might sleep on a jade pillow, which was highly valued for its natural coolness. Traditional Chinese medicine believed that cooling the head and neck improved blood circulation and preserved the Jing, essence, ensuring mental acuity. The lesson here is profound. For the Chinese elite, the heat and excessive softness of a modern pillow were seen as detrimental, causing the spirit to drift and the vital energy to stagnate. They valued firmness and cooling as the true hallmarks of restorative rest. Herbal regimens. Chinese imperial sleep rituals were inseparable from herbal medicine. Special tonics were consumed before sleep to regulate the heart and calm the shen. Herbs like jujube seed or swanza-ran and longan fruit were brewed into teas, acting as gentle sedatives to encourage a smooth, non-disruptive descent into the first sleep. The empress and emperor were constantly attended by physicians who calibrated these tonics nightly, ensuring their rest was pharmacologically precise. The entire imperial bedroom, from the cool jade beneath the head to the complex herbal vapors, was engineered as a high-precision medical instrument dedicated to preserving the ruler's vitality and extending life. 4. The architecture of control and fear. Despite the apparent luxury and calm rituals, imperial sleep was also defined by a profound, inescapable tension, security, and surveillance. For a ruler, the moment of sleep was the moment of greatest physical and political vulnerability. Therefore, the architecture of the imperial bedchamber became an elaborate defensive system, blending comfort with control. Nested walls and privacy. In both the Forbidden City in China and the palaces of Egypt, the emperor's sleeping quarters were often situated deep within a network of courtyards guarded by nested walls. The bedroom was not necessarily the largest room, but the most inaccessible. This multi-layered structure of guards, courtyards, and thick walls created a physical boundary that was the ultimate evolution of the ancestral fire perimeter. The rigidity of ritual. The act of going to bed was itself a complex ritual managed by dozens of staff. This meant that the quality of the environment was superb, the freedom was minimal. The emperor could not simply toss and turn or decide to stay up reading. His schedule was fixed to the movement of the court and the demands of state. This rigidity, while ensuring physical safety, often meant that imperial sleep could be isolating and stress-inducing, a classic example of how power disrupts natural human rhythms. The constant threat. Assassination was a perennial fear. The food was tested, the curtains were checked, and the guards were rotated hourly. Even the most powerful ruler could not fully escape the knowledge that his deepest rest was his moment of greatest risk. This historical truth underscores a vital modern lesson. No amount of luxury can compensate for psychological anxiety. If the mind does not feel truly safe, the deepest, most restorative stages of sleep, N3 and REM, will be suppressed regardless of the quality of the silk sheets. Imperial sleep reveals that the greatest obstacle to rest is not comfort, but the mind's persistent hypervigilance.
5. Echoes in the modern sanctuary. Tonight, as you lie in your own bedroom, your modern, private sanctuary, feel the echoes of the imperial quest for perfect rest. We no longer need jade pillows to cool our heads, but we seek the same things. 1. Controlled temperature. Your fan, your thermostat, your cooling mattress, these are the modern versions of the Egyptian granite headrest and the Chinese ceramic pillow. They all acknowledge the biological truth that a slightly lower core body temperature is the single most important physiological signal for initiating and maintaining deep sleep. 2. Ritualized transition. Your evening routine, the herbal tea, the aromatherapy diffuser, the quiet reading is the descendant of the Kifi incense and the court physician's tonic. You are deliberately using sensory cues to signal to your nervous system that the time for external engagement has ceased and the time for internal repair has begun. You are establishing a routine so predictable it becomes a sleep prescription. 3. Security and peace. You have achieved the ultimate luxury the pharaoh could only dream of, a safe, private room where you are protected not by rotating guards, but by the civil contract of your society. You are safe enough to enter the paralysis of REM sleep without fear. The lesson of the silk pillow is not about its softness, but about the intention behind it. The rulers of the ancient world meticulously engineered every detail of their environment because they understood that rest was the source of their power. Let that intention guide your rest tonight. Commit to the cooling, the quiet, and the ritual that your own imperial health demands. In our next chapter, we will encounter the one cultural disruption that fundamentally altered human life everywhere: the light that never sleeps, Edison and the industrial change. Rest now in the highly engineered calm of your own personal dynasty.
The monk's rest, sleep and spiritual discipline. 1. The purpose beyond survival. In our journey so far, we have observed two fundamental relationships with sleep. The primal relationship, survival driven by cellular repair and predator defense, and the imperial relationship, optimization driven by power and longevity. Tonight, we explore the third, most intimate relationship, the spiritual one. When civilization flourished, great religious traditions arose, asking profound questions about purpose, service, and the nature of the self. In every tradition, sleep presented a paradox. On one hand, it was an undeniable biological necessity, a gift of rest essential for health and sanity. On the other hand, it was a profound vulnerability, a time when the mind was unguarded, potentially prone to heedlessness, temptation, or sloth. How does one honor the biological need for deep, restorative rest while simultaneously remaining devoted to a spiritual path that demands vigilance and dedication? The answer, developed over millennia by monks, priests, imams, and gurus, was to transform sleep from a passive surrender into an active discipline. They recognized that the quality of one's rest directly impacts the quality of one's consciousness. For them, intentional sleep became a form of prayer, preparation, or purification. We will now look at three major traditions, Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam, to discover how they regulated the night, teaching us a profound modern lesson. Intentionality is the key to deep rest. 2. The Buddhist Middle Path, Heedfulness and Clarity. In the Buddhist tradition, sleep is viewed through the lens of mindfulness, samasati. The goal is not to eliminate sleep, which would be a physical impossibility, but to treat it with the same awareness and balance applied to waking life. Sleep is necessary, but indulgence in sleep is considered a spiritual hindrance. The core principle is the middle path: not too much sleep, which leads to sloth and mental dullness, and not too little, which leads to agitation and poor concentration. Monks follow strict disciplines regarding when they rise and when they rest, often sleeping for only 6 to 7 hours. Their practice focuses heavily on the moment of transition. 1. The ritual of mindful rest. Before lying down, a monk engages in walking meditation or quiet contemplation, intentionally settling the mind. When they finally take their rest, they often visualize themselves as remaining lucid, ready to spring back to awareness quickly. This discipline ensures the mind never fully sinks into the heavy weight of heedlessness. 2. The posture of awakening. The preferred posture for rest, particularly in the Theravada tradition, is the lion's posture. Lying on the right side, with the head supported by the hand, the left arm resting on the body, and the legs stacked. This posture is taught not for comfort, but for wakefulness in rest. It is said to keep the mind slightly more alert, allowing the monk to maintain awareness even while the body sleeps. It is a physical reminder that rest is temporary and intentional. 3. The practice of dream yoga. For advanced practitioners, sleep becomes an active tool for spiritual advancement through dream yoga. The goal is to achieve lucidity within the dream state, REM sleep, to recognize that one is dreaming and then use that highly active, paradoxical state to continue meditation or spiritual practice. This is the ultimate transformation of vulnerability, converting the deepest unconsciousness into a field for conscious growth. The Buddhist perspective is profoundly comforting for the modern sleeper. It teaches us that the quality of rest is linked to the state of mind before the head hits the pillow. If we approach rest with quiet intention and reverence, we are more likely to achieve clarity, reducing the agitation that often drives modern insomnia. The monk's rest is not about sleeping less, it is about sleeping mindfully. 3. The Christian Vigil. Sleep and the liturgical clock. In the early Christian monastic traditions, particularly the Benedictine rule, which governed monasteries for a millennium, sleep was managed less by the biological clock and more by the liturgical clock. The night was not personal time, it was time dedicated to God's service. Monks embraced the vigil, the waking hour we discussed in the last chapter, but they repurposed it as an organized communal period of prayer. The monk's night was deliberately fragmented. The first sleep, a few hours of deep rest after supper. The nocturnal office, around 2 a.m., the monk was roused for the office of matins, or vigils. This was the deepest, darkest, coldest part of the night, demanding true spiritual discipline. The service would last for 2 to 3 hours, involving long periods of psalmody, scriptural reading, and quiet prayer. This deliberate disruption was meant to remind the monk that his time was not his own, and that the spiritual work should take precedence over physical comfort.
This left a few hours for a second, lighter rest until sunrise. For these monks, sleep was necessary. The rule stipulated sufficient rest to prevent mental exhaustion, but it was also viewed as a time prone to spiritual danger. This included the 7 deadly sins, particularly acedia, spiritual sloth, and gluttony, overindulgence in comfort, including sleep. The discipline of the vigil had a powerful practical benefit. It forced the brain out of the single heavy sleep block and created periods of intense focus during a time the secular world was oblivious. This practice of periodic, focused wakefulness transformed a time of personal fear into a time of communal spiritual service. The Christian monastic tradition offers a lesson in sacrifice and structure. It teaches us that deep rest is earned through disciplined effort, and that our modern impulse to sleep right through the night may be sacrificing an opportunity for quiet reflection and productive thought during the natural watch hour. The monk's rest is a deliberate trade-off for comfort for vocation.
4. Islamic discipline. Sleep as an act of worship. In the Islamic tradition, sleep is elevated beyond mere biological necessity. It is seen as one of the signs of God's mercy and a vital opportunity for reward, provided it is performed with intentionality and according to the Sunnah, the practices of the Prophet Muhammad. The emphasis here is on surrounding the vulnerable state of sleep with profound ritual protection. 1. Purification. Wudu. The believer is instructed to perform wudu, ritual cleansing, before retiring. This simple act of washing the face and hands and feet serves as a physical and mental marker. It removes the impurities of the day, signaling to the nervous system that the body is prepared to enter a state of repose. This is the ultimate sleep hygiene ritual, turning physical cleanliness into spiritual preparation. 2. Prayer and supplication. Before lying down, specific prayers, du'as, are recited. These supplications acknowledge the fear of the night and consciously place the soul in the care of the divine. By verbalizing the intent to sleep and the surrender of the self, the believer calms the anxious mind, fulfilling the same function as the firelight perimeter, externalizing the burden of vigilance. 3. The right side posture. The Prophet Muhammad encouraged sleeping on the right side with the right cheek resting on the right hand. This practice, while appearing small, is deeply rooted in physical and spiritual comfort. Physiologically, sleeping on the right side helps to settle the heart and aids in digestion. Spiritually, it is an act of following the prophetic guidance, transforming a passive biological function into an act of ibadah, worship. 4. The midday nap, the kailala. Crucially, the tradition strongly encourages the kailala, a brief nap before the midday dhuhr prayer. This nap is praised as beneficial for spiritual clarity and physical energy. It is a powerful cultural endorsement of polyphasic rest, acknowledging the body's need for a break from the relentless monophasic schedule, linking back directly to the ancient siesta. The Islamic tradition teaches us to approach sleep with reverence and discipline. It suggests that sleep is not a break from our purpose, but a necessary pause that, when handled properly, actively enhances our ability to fulfill that purpose when awake. 5. Intentional rest, the modern discipline. Tonight, as you reflect on the monk's rest, understand that these traditions, the Buddhists' mindful posture, the Christians' nocturnal vigil, the Muslims' ritual of purification, were not attempts to complicate life, they were attempts to master it. They all understood that the transition to unconsciousness is a critical, fragile moment. They created intentional friction around the edges of sleep to prevent the mind from falling into passive heedlessness. Your takeaway is not to adopt a different religion's ritual, but to find your own form of discipline and intentionality. 1. Mindfulness. Approach your bed not as a collapse, but as an intentional transition. 2. Vigil. If you wake in the night, do not panic. Use that quiet time, your personal vigil, for
for contemplation, not for worrying about the morning. 3. Ritual. Create your own purification, a bath, a tea, a quiet journal entry, to signal the mind that the day's chaos has been contained. Let the wisdom of the world's quiet practitioners guide you now. Surrender to the rest you need, but do so with the profound intentionality of those who viewed sleep as a gateway to clarity. In our next chapter, we return to the historical timeline to explore the most widespread historical pattern of human rest, biphasic life, the lost art of the siesta across ancient cultures. Rest deeply with discipline and peace.
1. The silence of the village. We have now seen sleep defined by biology, by myth, and by spiritual discipline. Tonight, we enter the world of medieval Europe, where the long human night was shaped less by kings and temples, and more by the cold, the dark, and the powerful unseen forces of superstition. Imagine a small pre-industrial village around the year 1400. There is no street lighting, no electrical hum, no distant highway traffic. When the sun sets, the world falls into a profound, absolute darkness that the modern mind can barely comprehend. The only light comes from the moon, the stars, and the banked embers of the central hearth. The day was dominated by communal activity, noise, and the comforting predictability of manual labor. The night, however, belonged to the unknown. It was a world of sharp contrasts, where survival depended not just on your wits, but on your ability to navigate the psychological and literal shadows of the midnight hour. The rhythm that governed this world was the biphasic night, the first sleep and the second sleep. But in the medieval context, this waking hour was infused with something far richer than mere physical rest. It was saturated with local folklore, community, and a deep-seated fear of what stirred when the civilized world was vulnerable. Tonight, we settle into the darkness of the medieval home, understanding how our ancestors managed this fear, why they woke up in the dead of night, and how they transformed the most terrifying hour into one of the most intimate and productive periods of their lives. 2. The practicality of the divided night. As we discovered earlier, the human sleep pattern naturally tends towards segmentation when removed from the tyranny of artificial light. In medieval Europe, this pattern was universal and perfectly normal. The day's work ended at sunset. People would eat a light supper and, out of necessity, retire shortly thereafter to conserve the expensive fuel of candles or oil lamps. This began the first sleep. First sleep, the deep rest. This initial 4-hour block was the period of heavy, non-REM deep sleep, the intense foundational repair of the body and mind. It was a biologically non-negotiable block, the brain clearing the toxic byproducts of the day's physical labor. At the time we would recognize as 1 a.m. or 2 a.m., the first cycle of deep sleep would conclude, and the subtle hormonal changes in the brain, prolactin, would trigger the natural, gentle arousal. The entire household would wake up. The waking hour, the watch, this period, lasting between 1 and 2 hours, was not characterized by anxiety, but by calm, deliberate activity. The darkness was simply accepted. Second sleep, the light rest. After attending to necessary tasks, the household would drift back into sleep until dawn. This final block was lighter, dominated by the long, rich REM cycles that were vital for emotional processing and creative problem-solving. The crucial element to grasp is that this segmented rest was not a failure of sleep. It was a highly efficient, practical response to a world without reliable light.
It allowed maximum rest time in a world where daylight hours were short, and it maximized safety by having rotating natural periods of alertness. The modern sleeper, plagued by a midnight wake-up, can take profound comfort in the fact that they are simply aligning with the historical pre-industrial norm. 3. The terror of unlit space. While the waking hour was productive, it was also steeped in a profound psychological tension driven by the darkness itself. The medieval night was terrifying. The lack of light. Fire was expensive. Unless you were wealthy, the only light source was the hearth, and even that was often banked down to embers for safety and fuel conservation. This meant vast swaths of the home and the village were plunged into absolute inky blackness. This extreme visual deprivation forced the brain to rely solely on hearing, and hearing in the deep night often plays tricks. Every creak of the house, every rustle of wind, every distant animal cry was amplified and interpreted through the lens of anxiety. The fear of fire. Compounding the darkness was the fear of the single tool that protected them, fire. The entire wooden structure of the home was perpetually vulnerable to a spark. The anxiety was twofold: fear of the darkness outside and fear of the one thing that could destroy their safe perimeter inside. This fear created a hypervigilance that only began to dissipate during the quiet, structured waking hour. The medieval mindset. The pre-scientific worldview filled the shadows with specific spiritual threats. Since they did not have a clear understanding of psychology or germ theory, any misfortune, illness, or mental disturbance was quickly assigned to an external agent. The night was the time these agents were most active. This created a powerful feedback loop. The human anxiety about vulnerability was confirmed and codified by the culture's fears. The human mind, programmed to seek safety, interpreted the sounds and sights of the night as the movements of the unholy. 4. The Midnight Assembly. Witches, changelings, and ghosts. The waking hour, therefore, was the period when the border between the world of dreams, the vibrant chaos of the subconscious, and the physical world felt thinnest. This hour, roughly between 1 and 3 a.m., was popularly believed to be the time of the Midnight Assembly, when the forces of evil convened. Witchcraft and fairies. It was believed that witches and warlocks used this hour to fly to their sabbats. More commonly, people feared the subtle influence of malevolent fairies or changelings. If a baby suddenly became sickly or irritable, or if a member of the family seemed strangely distant, it was often assumed that the real person had been swapped out during the vulnerability of the first sleep. This belief was a culturally accepted way to explain illness, depression, or uncharacteristic behavior.
The ghostly hour. The lack of light and the deep stillness made the mind highly susceptible to suggestion. A movement in the corner of the eye, a strange sound in the attic. These became ghosts and restless spirits. These were often the spirits of people who died suddenly or violently, unable to find peace. The act of waking, sharing the quiet space with others, and reciting prayers was the primary defense against these supposed spectral incursions. The nightmare and sleep paralysis. The word nightmare itself descends from this period. A mara was a spirit or demon believed to physically sit on the chest of a sleeper, causing the terrifying sensation of pressure and paralysis. This was the medieval explanation for sleep paralysis, the biological condition we now understand as a disconnect between the active, dreaming REM brain and the temporarily immobilized body. In the medieval mind, that moment of helpless paralysis was absolute proof that a demonic entity had entered the room. The collective belief system acted as a kind of dream interpreter.
ensuring that the chaotic, anxiety-processing narratives of REM sleep were immediately given a physical, external enemy. The 5. The solace of the hearth watch. Despite the fear, the waking hour was profoundly intimate and stabilizing. The defense against the supernatural threats was not through fighting, but through quiet human connection. The activities performed during this hour were designed to be calming and bonding, transforming fear into familiarity. 1. Shared intimacy. For the couple, this was a time for conversation and connection, reinforcing the marital bond that was the essential unit of protection against a chaotic world. 2. Quiet preparation. Simple, productive tasks like checking the fire or mending tools or preparing food for the first meal of the day provided a calming sense of order and control. The simple rhythm of manual work acted as a counter-meditation against the anxieties of the night. 3. Spiritual solace. For the religious, this was a time of dedicated, uninterrupted prayer, using the silence to connect with the benevolent, higher power. The prayer was often a conscious effort to place the family under divine protection, externalizing the vigilance they could not personally sustain. 4. Storytelling. In many homes, this was the time of hushed stories, not the loud and energetic tales of the evening, but quiet sharing of family history, warnings, or moral tales, passed in the semi-darkness from elder to younger, binding the community's knowledge together. The waking hour, therefore, became a powerful ritual of managed fear and profound humanity. The threats were real, or believed to be, but the response was one of quiet, disciplined, and shared presence. The humans reclaimed the night from the supernatural. 6. The comfort of the normal wake-up tonight. As you lie in your modern bed, feel the echo of that medieval twilight. If you wake up tonight at 3 a.m. and your mind begins to cycle with anxiety, remember the first sleep and the second sleep. You are not experiencing a modern pathology, you are experiencing the natural historic rhythm of human rest. There is no Mara sitting on your chest. The shadowy figures are just the products of the REM processing brain. The sound you heard is simply the settling of your modern structure. Instead of fighting the wakefulness, embrace the spirit of the hearth watch. Acknowledge the silence. Use the profound quiet for reflection, not panic. Avoid the bright screen. Do not invite the electric tyranny that killed the second sleep. Keep the lights low and the information flow slow. Find your ritual. Tend to a quiet, non-stressful task. A few minutes of reading, writing down a thought, or simply deep, intentional breathing. By allowing yourself a quiet, intentional pause, you honor the ancient wisdom of your ancestors, transforming the anxiety of the midnight hour into a period of self-compassion and effective transition to the restorative second sleep. In our next chapter, we will encounter the force that finally dismantled this ancient rhythm forever. The light that never sleeps, Edison, and the industrial change. Rest now with the quiet confidence of the medieval soul, safe in the circle of the hearth.
1. The end of the waking hour. In our last journey, we settled into the medieval twilight, finding comfort in the rhythm of the biphasic night, the first sleep, the quiet, conscious waking hour, and the second sleep. This pattern, governed by the absolute darkness of the night, was the ancestral norm for centuries, a flexible response to the body's need for deep rest and the mind's need for quiet reflection. But history rarely remains quiet. Around the mid-19th century, a relentless new force began to sweep across Europe and the burgeoning United States, the Industrial Revolution. And with it came a powerful new tyrant, the clock. No longer was human life dictated by the sun's slow arc across the sky, the subtle shifts of the moon, or the body's natural rhythm. Life became a matter of minutes, schedules, and shifts. The demands of the new factory economy were non-negotiable, and they were fundamentally incompatible with the relaxed two-part night. You could not be relied upon to operate a dangerous piece of machinery at 7 a.m. if you had spent the hours between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. quietly praying, mending clothes, or talking with your family. The new economic system demanded an unbroken block of wakefulness during the day, and therefore required an unbroken block of unconsciousness at night. Tonight, we explore how humanity was forcibly wrenched from its ancient rhythm and compressed into the monophasic 8-hour structure we know today. We will look at the tools, especially the electric light, that enabled this monumental, culture-wide shift, and how the destruction of the biphasic night created the modern sleep crisis. 2. The first disruption: gaslight and the social night. The electric light bulb, Thomas Edison's enduring symbol of progress, was the final blow, but the disruption began earlier with the introduction of cheaper, accessible forms of public lighting: whale oil, kerosene, and most powerfully, gaslight. Before the 1700s, staying up late was an expensive luxury reserved only for the very wealthy who could afford hundreds of candles. But as cities began to install gaslight in the 19th century, the social life of the middle and working classes was profoundly extended. The monetization of darkness. For the first time, businesses could operate well past sunset. Shops stayed open later, taverns and theaters boomed, and the street itself became a safer, more vibrant place after dusk. The darkness, which had always served as the biological and social boundary of rest, was suddenly defeated by an artificial extension of the day. This had a direct impact on the first sleep. As people delayed their social and domestic activities until 10 p.m. or 11 p.m., the start of their first sleep was pushed back. If the first sleep starts late, the inevitable waking hour, which is fixed by the body's internal clock, falls closer to the necessary wake-up time for work. Instead of waking at 2 a.m. for 2 quiet hours and then drifting into the second sleep until 7 a.m., a person starting rest at 11 p.m. and waking at 3 a.m. suddenly only has a few fragmented hours left before the relentless demands of the factory began. The waking hour, once a sanctuary of calm reflection, was now the source of deep anxiety. If I wake up now, I will not get enough rest before the whistle blows. This anxiety transformed the waking hour into insomnia. It was no longer a natural pause. It was an economic problem. The modern sleeper's panic upon waking at 3 a.m. is the direct inherited trauma of the industrial age. 3. The electric hammer, Edison's legacy. In 1879, Thomas Edison and his team demonstrated a commercially viable incandescent light bulb. This invention, perhaps more than any other, permanently divorced human biology from its evolutionary rhythm. The light bulb did 3 catastrophic things to human rest. 1. It erased the boundary. Unlike gaslight, which was relatively dim, expensive, and difficult to manage, electricity provided cheap, instantaneous, and pervasive light. With the flip of a switch, the night was abolished. This meant that the evening could be utilized without limit, for study, for socializing, for endless work. The natural signal of fading light, which triggers the brain's cascade of sleep hormones, was perpetually overridden. 2. It created the 24/7 schedule. The light bulb allowed factories to run 3 shifts a day. This meant that the productive capacity of capital was now decoupled from the solar cycle. For the factory owner, it was an economic miracle. For the worker, it was a biological tyranny. The individual became an interchangeable part in a system that literally never rested. 3. It redefined sleep as non-productive. In the agrarian world, sleep, or the waking hour, was seen as a necessary part of productivity, a moment to mend the tools for the next day.
In the industrial world, time became money, and any hour not spent working was seen as waste. Sleep became viewed as a passive, non-productive absence from labor, something to be minimized and compartmentalized. This economic pressure forced the human body to compress its segmented rhythm into one deep, continuous block. The brain was essentially told, "You have 8 hours. You must complete 4 billion years of cellular repair, emotional processing, and memory consolidation in this window, and you must do it perfectly." The cultural narrative shifted. The person who needed a fragmented night or a midday siesta was now viewed as weak, lazy, or unreliable. Dedication was measured not just by how long you worked, but by how quickly and completely you could shut down and recharge, ready to serve the machine again.
1. The end of the waking hour. In our last journey, we settled into the medieval twilight, finding comfort in the rhythm of the biphasic night, the first sleep, the quiet, conscious waking hour, and the second sleep. This pattern, governed by the absolute darkness of the night, was the ancestral norm for centuries, a flexible response to the body's need for deep rest and the mind's need for quiet reflection. But history rarely remains quiet. Around the mid-19th century, a relentless new force began to sweep across Europe and the burgeoning United States, the Industrial Revolution. And with it came a powerful new tyrant, the clock. No longer was human life dictated by the sun's slow arc across the sky, the subtle shifts of the moon, or the body's natural rhythm. Life became a matter of minutes, schedules, and shifts. The demands of the new factory economy were non-negotiable, and they were fundamentally incompatible with the relaxed, two-part night. You could not be relied upon to operate a dangerous piece of machinery at 7 a.m. if you had spent the hours between 1 and 3 a.m. quietly praying, mending clothes, or talking with your family. The new economic system demanded an unbroken block of wakefulness during the day, and therefore required an unbroken block of unconsciousness at night. Tonight we explore how humanity was forcibly wrenched from its ancient rhythm and compressed into the monophasic 8-hour structure we know today. We will look at the tools, especially the electric light, that enabled this monumental culture-wide shift and how the destruction of the biphasic night created the modern sleep crisis. 2. The first disruption: gaslight and the social night. The electric light bulb, Thomas Edison's enduring symbol of progress, was the final blow, but the disruption began earlier with the introduction of cheaper, accessible forms of public lighting: whale oil, kerosene, and most powerfully, gaslight. Before the 1700s, staying up late was an expensive luxury reserved only for the very wealthy who could afford hundreds of candles. But as cities began to install gaslight in the 19th century, the social life of the middle and working classes was profoundly extended. The monetization of darkness. For the first time, businesses could operate well past sunset. Shops stayed open later, taverns and theaters boomed, and the street itself became a safer, more vibrant place after dusk. The darkness, which had always served as the biological and social boundary of rest, was suddenly defeated by an artificial extension of the day. This had a direct impact on the first sleep. As people delayed their social and domestic activities until 10 or 11 p.m., the start of their first sleep was pushed back. If the first sleep starts late, the inevitable waking hour, which is fixed by the body's internal clock, falls closer to the necessary wake-up time for work. Instead of waking at 2 a.m. for 2 quiet hours and then drifting into the second sleep until 7 a.m., a person starting rest at 11 p.m. and waking at 3 a.m. suddenly only has a few fragmented hours left before the relentless demands of the factory began. The waking hour, once a sanctuary of calm reflection, was now a source of deep anxiety. If I wake up now, I will not get enough rest before the whistle blows. This anxiety transformed the waking hour into insomnia. It was no longer a natural pause, it was an economic problem. The modern sleeper's panic upon waking at 3 a.m. is the direct inherited trauma of the industrial age. 3. The electric hammer, Edison's legacy. In 1879, Thomas Edison and his team demonstrated a commercially viable incandescent light bulb. This invention, perhaps more than any other, permanently divorced human biology from its evolutionary rhythm. The light bulb did 3 catastrophic things to human rest. 1. It erased the boundary. Unlike gaslight, which was relatively dim, expensive, and difficult to manage, electricity provided cheap, instantaneous, and pervasive light. With the flip of a switch, the night was abolished. This meant that the evening could be utilized without limit, for study, for socializing, for endless work. The natural signal of fading light, which triggers the brain's cascade of sleep hormones, was perpetually overridden. 2. It created the 24/7 schedule. The light bulb allowed factories to run 3 shifts a day, so this meant that the productive capacity of capital was now decoupled from the solar cycle. For the factory owner, it was an economic miracle. For the worker, it was a biological tyranny. The individual became an interchangeable part in a system that literally never rested. 3. It redefined sleep as non-productive. In the agricultural world, sleep, or the waking hour, was seen as a necessary part of productivity, a moment to mend the tools for the next day. In the industrial world, time became money, and any hour not spent working was seen as waste. Sleep became viewed as a passive, non-productive absence from labor, something to be minimized and compartmentalized. This economic pressure forced the human body to compress its segmented rhythm into one deep, continuous block. The brain was essentially told, you have 8 hours, you must complete 4 billion years of cellular repair, emotional processing, and memory consolidation in this window, and you must do it perfectly. The cultural narrative shifted. The person who needed a fragmented night or a midday siesta was now viewed as weak, lazy, or unreliable. Dedication was measured not just by how long you worked, but by how quickly and completely you could shut down and recharge, ready to serve the machine again.
1. The surface of surrender. We have navigated the long, ancient path of sleep, recognizing it as a contract, the exchange of vigilance for deep, restorative repair. We have seen our ancestors secure their rest with fire, ceremony, and a communal bond of the herd. But as humanity settled, solved the issues of immediate danger, and began to conquer the night with artificial light, the focus shifted from the external threat to the internal experience. The ultimate question became not, am I safe enough to sleep, but am I comfortable enough to sleep well? The answer to this question lives beneath you tonight. It is the mattress, the most personal and essential piece of furniture we own, yet one whose history we rarely consider. The bed, which started as a simple pile of leaves or a hard elevated stone, slowly, over millennia, evolved into a complex, multi-layered machine designed for perfect, cushioned surrender. The story of the mattress is the story of comfort as an industry, a journey that tracks humanity's growing wealth, its changing notions of hygiene, and its eventual attempt to buy its way back into natural rest. Tonight, we explore this evolution, feeling the texture of history beneath us. We will discover that the true comfort of the modern bed is not just in its softness, but in the precision and security that our ancestors fought for, layer by layer, across thousands of years. 2. From necessity to status, the pre-modern bed. For the vast majority of human history, the resting surface was dictated by necessity, not comfort. The Paleolithic pile. For early hominids living in caves, the bed was a strategic pile of grass, leaves, and soft animal skins.
The earliest known example, found in South Africa, dates back 77,000 years and consisted of compressed layers of sedges and aromatic leaves. This wasn't luxury, it was hygiene and pest control. The leaves were chosen specifically because they contained natural chemicals that repelled insects, and the layers created a buffer against the damp, cold ground, ensuring that the body could maintain the temperature necessary for deep sleep. The Egyptian elevation. As civilization arose, the bed became elevated. We noted the pharaoh's elevated platform in the last chapter, which served to keep the body cool and safe from crawling creatures. This elevation was a critical step, separating the sleeper from the earth and establishing the bed as a distinct, specialized piece of furniture. The Roman luxury. The Romans, with their engineering prowess, were perhaps the first to really embrace comfort as a luxury. The lectus, bed, was often made of bronze or silver and featured webbing stretched across the frame. This webbing was then topped with a mat filled with natural fibers, straw, reeds, or wool. For the wealthy, the fill might be fine goose down or soft feathers, making the first truly soft mattresses. The richness of the bed became a powerful marker of social status, often displayed prominently in the central rooms of the home. The medieval hardship. Following the collapse of the Roman Empire, the art of comfort largely disappeared for the common person. The medieval peasant often slept on a simple bag, a ticking sack filled with whatever was cheapest and nearest, straw, dried peas, or corn husks. These fillings had two major drawbacks. They were uncomfortable, and they had to be frequently replaced due to decay and infestation. The common sleeping surface was hard, itchy, and difficult to keep clean. The sleep was adequate for recovery, but the surface itself was a constant physical challenge. This history teaches us that the fundamental purpose of the sleeping surface for millennia was not softness, but temperature control, hygiene, and elevation. Softness was an accidental side effect of wealth, not an engineered goal. 3. The feather bed and the wealth display. The Renaissance and early modern Europe saw the bed become a profound symbol of wealth and inheritance, culminating in the invention of the true feather bed. For the rising merchant class and the nobility, the bed was the single most valuable item in the house. It was often placed in the main reception room, draped in expensive velvet and silks, where guests would receive visitors while lying down, demonstrating their comfort and status. The value of softness. Feather beds, large, deep mattresses stuffed entirely with down and soft feathers, were prohibitively expensive. They symbolized a complete mastery over the environment. The sleeper was so wealthy they could afford to surround themselves with the softest, rarest materials, creating an environment that completely divorced them from the uncomfortable reality of the outside world. When a wealthy person died, the bed, often meticulously itemized in the will, was passed down as a precious family heirloom, second only to land or jewelry. To sleep in a feather bed was to literally lie upon your inheritance. This obsession with height, drapery, and extreme softness ironically compromised sleep hygiene. Featherbeds were impossible to clean, retained immense amounts of moisture and dust, and became breeding grounds for pests. But the display of comfort trumped the biological reality of cleanliness. This era perfectly illustrates the difference between perceived comfort, softness as status, and biological comfort, cleanliness and airflow. We often still fall into this trap today, prioritizing the feeling of luxury over the proven necessities of a cool, clean sleep environment. The transition from this soft but ultimately unhygienic status symbol was inevitable, driven by the new forces of the industrial age. 4. The invention of the inner spring, democratizing comfort. As the Industrial Revolution took hold in the late 19th century, two parallel forces
demanded a radical reinvention of the sleeping surface, public health, and mass production. The Victorian era brought a new obsession with sanitation and germs. The old decomposing straw and pest-ridden feather beds of the past became sources of medical anxiety. A cleaner, more durable solution was needed.
The answer arrived in the form of metal and machinery. The concept of the inner spring mattress emerged from industrial innovation. Coiled steel springs, originally developed for upholstery and carriage seats, were adapted to create a resilient, durable core for the mattress. The shift was profound. 1. Hygiene revolution. Unlike organic fillings, steel springs did not harbor pests, decompose, or absorb moisture. They created an airy, ventilated core that was infinitely cleaner and more durable than anything that came before. 2. Affordability. The industrialization of steel coiling made mattresses cheap and mass-producible. For the first time, a clean, supportive, and truly comfortable sleeping surface was accessible not just to royalty, but to the rapidly expanding middle and working classes. The invention of the inner spring mattress effectively democratized comfort. It moved the bed from a rare, expensive commodity to a necessary, affordable, and sanitary piece of furniture. It also transformed the cultural expectation of sleep. The hard bed of the peasant was now an anachronism. The soft, supportive, and clean modern bed became the standard. This new technology finally allowed the brain to fully surrender to the long, monophasic rest demanded by the factory schedule, knowing that the structural support beneath them was consistent, clean, and durable. 5. Comfort as a marketing tool, the modern sanctuary. The 20th century completed the transition, turning the mattress into a high-precision, highly marketed commodity. Sleep was no longer just a biological function, it was a lifestyle purchase. The rise of massive brands focused their marketing not on structural support or cleanliness, but on sensory experience and emotional value. The names themselves, Beauty Rest, Serta Perfect Sleeper, suggested that buying the mattress was buying beauty, perfection, and the promise of a flawless life. The bedroom was rebranded as a personal sanctuary, a place of escape from the noise and complexity of the 24/7 world. The ultimate luxury became customization. Soft, firm, extra firm, pillow top, plush. The consumer was given endless options, all designed to meet the modern demand for hyper-personalized comfort. This era cemented the cultural idea that if you are tired, the problem must be the surface you are resting on. It shifted the blame for poor sleep from environmental factors like light, stress, schedule, to the failure of the physical product, which created the constant, often restless pursuit of the perfect mattress that still drives the industry today. The introduction of memory foam, originally developed by NASA for airplane seat cushions, in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, completed the cycle. Memory foam represented the ultimate surrender, a surface that perfectly molded and conformed to the individual body, eliminating pressure points and offering the illusion of floating. It was the final, technological answer to the ancient human problem of how to rest a complex body without pressure or pain. 6. The enduring truth of rest. Tonight, as you feel the comfort of your own modern mattress, remember the long journey it took to get here. You are lying on the confluence of cleanliness, mass production, and a millennia-old desire for safety. The greatest comfort, however, is not found in the springs, foam, or silk. It is found in the peace of mind that allows you to fully utilize the engineered support beneath you. The history of the mattress teaches us 1. Support trumps softness. The most effective bed is the one that allows your body to align perfectly, ensuring that your muscles can completely relax and your brain can fully commit to the deep physical repair of N3 sleep. 2. Cleanliness is peace. The ancient emphasis on pest control and the modern obsession with hygiene are rooted in the same truth. The cleaner the environment, the lower the background vigilance of the brain. 3. Rest is intentional. Even the most luxurious mattress cannot overcome the stress of the industrial night. Your rest must still be protected by the ritual and the intentional digital sunset we discussed earlier. Settle into your sanctuary now. Feel the support beneath you, a testament to the long human journey towards safe rest. Allow the physical security of your bed to signal to your mind that the time for vigilance is over. In our next chapter, we will confront the final modern disruptions to rest, the hourglass of anxiety, sleep in the 20th century, exploring how media and modern stress began to erode our hard-won peace. Rest deeply, enveloped by the layers of history beneath you.
1. The shifting threat. We have traced the long human journey toward rest. We have seen how our ancestors successfully secured their sleep by defeating external threats. They climbed trees to avoid predators, they built fires to repel hyenas, and they relied on the safety of the communal herd. The sleep they achieved was hard-won and deep, allowing the human brain to flourish. But as we enter the 20th century, the nature of the threat changes entirely. The physical boundary of the night is now safe. We have locked doors, warm beds, and reliable light. Yet sleep itself has never felt more elusive, more fragile, or more frustrating. This is the age of the modern sleep crisis. The problem is no longer external, it is internal. We are no longer fighting the lion at the door. We are fighting the relentless, buzzing anxiety that lives inside our heads. The threats are abstract: financial instability, political uncertainty, social pressure, and a perpetual feeling of being behind the demands of a world that never stops. The 20th century, with its technological marvels and economic ambition, fundamentally changed the landscape of the human night in three crucial ways. It abolished the boundary of time, it introduced the electronic sentinel into the bedroom, and it flooded the mind with an unprecedented level of anxiety and information overload. Tonight, we examine this shift. We look at the forces that turned the quiet, necessary surrender of sleep into a stressful achievement, and we learn how to reclaim our personal boundary against the relentless pressure of the 24/7 age. 2. The final demise of the boundary. The seeds of the 24/7 economy were sown by the light bulb, but the 20th century completed the annihilation of the natural time boundary. The concept of the night, a time when the world collectively paused, ceased to exist. The rise of shift work. The relentless demand for productivity meant that industries, healthcare, manufacturing, transportation, security, moved to a 24-hour, three-shift model. For millions of workers, the body's deepest, most critical biological rhythms were violently overwritten. The night was no longer for rest, it was for labor. This meant suppressing the natural melatonin release and trying to force sleep during the bright, noisy day, a process that is neurologically exhausting and leads to persistent fatigue and severe health risks. Global connectivity. The invention of modern telecommunications, telegraph, telephone, and eventually the internet, meant that business never truly shut down. A crisis in Tokyo required a response in New York. The human mind, which evolved to operate locally and linearly, was suddenly asked to track events across dozens of time zones. The world became a single, continuous anxiety stream. The cult of busy. This cultural change created the final psychological trap, the pervasive belief that we should be constantly available, constantly productive, and constantly consuming information. We began to fear missing out, FOMO, not just on social events, but on news, market changes, or professional opportunities. This fear is antithetical to rest. The deep surrender of sleep requires a cognitive decision that for the next 8 hours, nothing is so important that it cannot wait. The 20th century made that decision psychologically impossible for many. The relentless pace meant that the body was chronically stuck in a low-level state of sympathetic activation, the fight or flight mode. This state is designed to pump adrenaline and cortisol, keeping the brain alert.
A brain flooded with cortisol cannot produce the delta waves necessary for deep, cleansing sleep. The mind was perpetually poised, waiting for the next urgent signal from the global machine. 3. The electronic sentinel, radio and television. Just as the economic world abolished the time boundary, media technology abolished the sensory boundary of the bedroom. The mid-20th century introduced the radio and later the television, becoming the dominant cultural forces in the evening ritual. These devices acted as powerful, hypnotic electronic sentinels, standing watch where the ancient fire once glowed. The narrative trap. Television in particular became the primary activity for the evening transition. Instead of engaging in quiet conversation, slow reading, or domestic ritual, the family unit gathered in front of a brightly lit screen, passively consuming fast-paced, emotionally stimulating content. This was a direct reversal of the ancestral hearth watch, which was dedicated to low-stimulus, calming connection. The brain, designed to ramp down energy production as light fades, was instead being force-fed rapid visual data, stimulating the attention centers, emotional tension, dramas, news, and crime shows triggering cortisol release, artificial bright light, directly suppressing the sleep hormone melatonin. The melatonin suppression. This is the core physiological sabotage. Melatonin, the neurochemical responsible for signaling the onset of night, is released by the brain's pineal gland in response to darkness. The blue-rich light emitted by television screens and later by computer and phone screens is the specific wavelength that mimics bright daylight. By sitting in front of the TV until the moment of sleep, we were telling our 4-billion-year-old biological clock it is still daytime. The brain would suppress melatonin, delay the start of NREM stage 1, and make the transition into the deep cleansing N3 sleep much harder and shorter. The deep repair was constantly shortened by the last 30 minutes of stimulating screen time. The irony is profound. Media was often used to relax, but the technology used to deliver it was simultaneously activating the brain's alertness system. The electronic sentinel stood guard, preventing the deep surrender necessary for true rest.
4. The weight of global information. If the light and the schedule created a physiological obstacle, the information age of the late 20th century created a cognitive obstacle. For most of human history, information was local, immediate, and actionable. You worried about the weather, the harvest, or the local war chief. The post-World War II era brought the relentless flow of global, abstract threat. The Cold War, the existential dread of nuclear annihilation was a background hum of anxiety for decades. A nightly news report on Soviet missiles or political tensions was the final input before sleep, a signal to the brain that the entire world was fundamentally unstable. Economic anxiety, the constant tracking of the stock market, inflation, and global financial crisis, introduced a permanent state of worry about abstract forces far outside the individual's control. This anxiety activates the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning and worry precisely when it needs to be quiet. The problem of volume, the sheer volume of information available via cable TV, 24-hour news cycles, and eventually the early internet, meant that the brain never had a chance to fully process the day's input before being bombarded with the next day's material. This chronic overload inhibits the memory consolidation process, REM sleep, by presenting the brain with too much data to successfully file away. The brain needs time to declutter before rest. The 20th century made decluttering nearly impossible. Instead of a clean slate, The modern mind arrives at the bedside carrying the weight of global conflict, market instability, and a massive backlog of unfiled information. The result is the relentless spin cycle of thought that keeps the modern sleeper trapped in the frustrating light stages of NREM. 5. The medicalization of failure. In response to this culture-wide crisis, the medical and commercial worlds mobilized. If sleep was now a problem, it needed a solution. The late 20th century saw the rise of dedicated sleep labs, polysomnography, where sleep could be measured, tracked, and pathologized. Scientists began to diagnose and categorize a myriad of disorders: obstructive sleep apnea, OSA, restless leg syndrome, narcolepsy, and the massive category of chronic insomnia. This focus was vital for treating serious disorders, but it also had a subtle psychological effect on the general population. It reinforced the feeling of failure. If you struggled to sleep, you didn't just have a bad night. You feared you had a disorder that needed fixing with a pill or a machine. This created the massive sleep industry. Pharmaceutical companies produced prescription sedatives, which often bypassed natural sleep cycles, achieving unconsciousness without necessarily delivering the deep, high-quality N3 and REM required for true restoration. The mattress and bedding industry pivoted, marketing advanced technology, memory foam, smart beds as the technological cure for the anxiety created by technology. The ultimate irony is that as our sleep became more precarious, the tools to monitor and analyze it became more sophisticated. We could measure every metric of our poor sleep, increasing the background anxiety about our performance. The hourglass of anxiety began to empty, creating the modern demand for a simple, authentic return to rest. 6. Reclaiming quiet sovereignty. Tonight, as you feel the pulse of the 24/7 world outside your door, embrace the essential knowledge of this chapter. Your sleep struggle is not a personal failure, but a biological defense against a historically abnormal environment. Your body is simply saying, I cannot safely shut down until the threat of the light and the threat of the anxiety have been removed. You are the final sovereign of your time. Reclaim that sovereignty by asserting your personal boundary. Silence the sentinel. Commit to a true digital sunset. Turn off the screens and news consumption 60 minutes before bed. This allows the melatonin rhythm, the ancient chemical messenger of darkness, to flow unimpeded. Unload the hourglass. Dedicate time earlier in the evening to unload the day's anxieties, writing a quick to-do list for tomorrow, or journaling briefly. This externalizes the cognitive backlog, preventing the spin cycle of thought from dominating your rest. Embrace the pause. If you wake, remember the waking hour. Do not panic about lost minutes. Simply enjoy the quiet relief from the noise of the day, trusting your body to return to the second sleep. Your journey is now complete. In our final chapter, we will synthesize the lessons of this entire journey, exploring the science of calm, from sleep labs to sleep apps, and how we can integrate ancient wisdom with modern knowledge to truly reclaim the night. Rest now in the quiet confidence of your personal sovereignty.
1. The paradox of modern rest. In our previous chapter, we confronted the modern sleep crisis, the anxiety created by the 24/7 economy and the relentless glow of the electronic sentinel. We found ourselves in the strange predicament of the 21st century. We possess the safest, cleanest, most comfortable beds in human history, yet we are, as a society, profoundly sleep deprived.
The problem, we realized, is that modern life destroyed the natural boundary of night. To solve this dilemma, we had to turn away from history and turn toward the meticulous, patient work of science. If we could no longer rely on the sun and the moon to tell us how to sleep, we needed instruments to listen to the whispers of the sleeping brain itself. The story of modern sleep science, beginning in the quiet solitude of the research lab, is a history of profound discovery. It is the story of how scientists painstakingly measured, mapped, and decoded the most mysterious part of our existence, proving that sleep is not a passive surrender, but a complex, life-sustaining work shift. Tonight, we take a narrative journey through the sleep lab. We will meet the instruments and the minds that first peered into the absolute darkness of unconsciousness, providing the evidence we need to finally trust our rest. By understanding how our brain works while we sleep, we can finally achieve the deep, intentional calm that the ancient world held so sacred. 2. The first look, mapping the electrical night. The story of modern sleep science begins not with a biologist, but with an engineer, Hans Berger, in the 1920s. Berger pioneered a device that could measure the minute electrical activity of the human brain, the electroencephalography, or EEG. Before the EEG, sleep was measured purely through external observation. Was the person snoring? Were their eyes moving? Were they breathing? Sleep was defined by the absence of waking behavior. The EEG changed everything. It provided the first direct objective evidence that the brain did not simply turn off when we slept. It shifted into entirely new, organized patterns of electrical rhythm. The discovery of brainwave states, Berger first measured the rhythmic, synchronous electrical activity of the resting, awake brain. Alpha waves, the waves of quiet contemplation. Then, as subjects drifted into sleep, the brain activity would slow further, becoming larger and slower, a sign of deep neural synchronization. This discovery was revolutionary. It proved that sleep was not a uniform passive state, but a collection of distinct, measurable neurological programs. As researchers refined the EEG in the 1940s and 1950s, they began to recognize the distinct markers that separated the stages of sleep. Theta waves, the slower, longer waves characteristic of the earliest dozing phase. Delta waves, the largest, slowest waves, the very signature of deep sleep, N3. The EEG gave science its first objective look into the architecture of the night, confirming that the deepest rest was signaled by the slowest, most powerful electrical pulsations. The slow delta waves were the direct electrical proof of the ancient chemical cleansing we discussed earlier. Understanding this initial mapping gives us great comfort. When you worry you are not resting, remember the silent, powerful instruments of the lab. Your rest is not a feeling, it is a measurable electrical reality. 3. The paradoxical revelation, the discovery of REM. The true watershed moment in sleep science arrived in 1953 thanks to the patience of a graduate student, Eugene Askirin, and his advisor, Nathaniel Kleitman, at the University of Chicago. Askirin was observing children, monitoring their EEG readings, when he noticed something highly unusual. Periodically, about 90 minutes after falling asleep, the children's eyes would begin to dart rapidly back and forth beneath their eyelids. Intriguingly, when Askirin woke the subjects during these periods of rapid eye movement, they reported with almost perfect consistency that they had been dreaming. This discovery shattered the prevailing scientific view that dreaming was a fleeting, psychological side effect of falling asleep or waking up. Instead, it proved that dreaming was a pervasive, recurring, and biologically intense state occurring several times a night. Kleitman and Askirin named this state REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep.
The EEG readings confirmed the paradox. The brain activity during REM was fast, jagged, and active, virtually identical to the brain of a person who was wide awake and focused. Yet the body remained physically paralyzed, the temporary, necessary shutdown we discussed earlier. This discovery changed sleep research overnight. It provided the biological clock for dreaming, proving that the vibrant chaos of the subconscious theater was not random, but highly organized. It became clear that the night was not a single state of rest, but a dynamic, cycling dance between NREM, the quiet, delta wave-dominated phase focused on physical repair, immune function, and toxin cleansing, and REM, the active, paradoxical phase focused on emotional regulation, memory consolidation, and creative problem-solving. The discovery of REM was the scientific validation of the ancient concept of the House of Dreams, Morpheus. The chaotic narratives that medieval Europe ascribed to demons were now understood as the high-level, vital work of the emotional brain operating in a chemically stress-free environment.
4. Defining the stages, the hypnogram. Following the discovery of REM, the science moved rapidly to standardize the night. In the 1960s, researchers refined the electrical mapping, leading to the formalized classification of the 4, now 5, distinct stages of sleep. N1, dozing, the light transition phase. N2, light sleep, the dominant phase, where the brain actively blocks out sound, sleep spindles. N3, deep sleep, the delta wave powerhouse, crucial for physical repair and growth hormone release. REM, dream sleep, the cognitive and emotional maintenance phase. Crucially, researchers began to graph these stages, creating the hypnogram, which visually maps the cyclical nature of the human night. The hypnogram confirmed the profound rhythmic structure of human rest. The early night is dominated by N3, the most physically restorative, and the late night is dominated by longer and longer bursts of REM, the most psychologically and creatively restorative. This finding provides the most compelling scientific argument for honoring the full duration of your sleep. If you cut your sleep short, you are disproportionately sacrificing the later REM cycles, the very stage that processes stress and allows for emotional clarity. The biological proof is clear. Skipping the last hour means skipping emotional processing. The sleep lab also quickly discovered a major physical obstacle to healthy rest: obstructive sleep apnea, or OSA. Researchers noted that some patients' breathing would repeatedly stop and start throughout the night, causing micro-arousals that constantly fragmented the deep sleep cycles. The discovery of OSA, a condition that disrupts deep rest and causes chronic fatigue, led to the development of the CPAP machine and validated the need for physical monitoring during rest. The science of the 20th century transformed the mysterious night into a clearly defined, measurable, and highly important neurological event. The foundation of calm was laid by data. 5. The quantified self, from the lab to the wrist. The 21st century marked the final evolution of sleep science, the democratization of the sleep lab. The bulky EEG machines and complex monitoring equipment moved from the specialized clinic into our homes, our beds, and onto our wrists. The modern sleep app and wearable tracker are the ultimate evolution of the EEG. They use sophisticated sensors, accelerometers, heart rate monitors, and algorithms to estimate when the body is in light, deep, or REM sleep, providing the user with a nightly score, often delivered with the morning coffee. This transition created the paradox of the quantified self. The benefit: these tools have made millions of people aware of their sleep deficiencies, validating the need for rest and providing data to discuss with doctors.
They have democratized knowledge that was once limited to the scientific community. The anxiety. They also created a new source of stress, orthosomnia, or the obsession with achieving the perfect sleep score. People began to feel anxiety about their rest, leading to the hypervigilance that is the antithesis of sleep. If the app says you got poor deep sleep, you feel anxious, which guarantees poor rest the following night. The electronic sentinel, now on your wrist, has become the self-critic. The science of calm teaches us that the data is useful, but the feeling is paramount. The modern task is to use the data for insight without letting it fuel anxiety. We must find the balance between the ancient wisdom of trusting the body and the modern need for objective measurement. 6. The synthesis of calm. Tonight, let the knowledge of the sleep lab be a source of profound comfort. You do not need to measure your delta waves to know they are firing. You do not need an app to validate the relief you feel after a period of deep, healing rest. The science simply proves what the fire, the temple, and the monk already knew. Sleep is the foundation of human vitality. The EEG and the hypnogram simply confirm the wisdom of the natural rhythm. Honor the early night for physical repair, N3, and protect the late night for emotional repair, REM. The greatest lesson of modern sleep science is that sleep is an active, vital behavior, the most productive thing your body does all day. Treat it with the respect it deserves. Trust the process. In our final chapter, we will synthesize this entire journey. We will bring together the lessons of the savannah, the hearth, and the lab to explore reclaiming the night, the return to natural rhythms. Rest now in the scientifically proven power of your sleeping mind.
1. The synthesis, the unified wisdom of the night. We have reached the end of our 4-billion-year journey. We began with the single, trembling cell that invented the circadian clock to survive its own toxic efficiency. We moved to the wild, where dolphins split their consciousness and zebras shared the communal vigil. We witnessed fire transform vulnerability into civilization, and we saw empires and monks ritualize rest as a source of spiritual and physical power. Finally, we navigated the modern age, the chaos of the electric light and the anxiety of the 24/7 economy, and found the quiet certainty of sleep science in the lab. The vast river of history flows to this moment, your time of rest. The greatest truth we have uncovered is that your struggle with sleep is not a personal failing. It is the natural, inevitable tension between your ancient, genetically programmed need for deep, safe rest and the modern world's relentless pressure to be perpetually awake and available. Tonight, we take all this knowledge, the wisdom of the cell, the herd, the fire, the temple, and the EEG, and we weave it into a single, resilient understanding. We stop chasing sleep, and we start inviting it. We reclaim the night by returning to the two fundamental, non-negotiable truths. 1. Security is ritual. The environment must signal deep, absolute safety. 2. Trust is surrender. The mind must trust the body's ancient, cyclical program. Let us now apply this unified wisdom to your modern routine, ensuring that your rest is not a hurried collapse, but a conscious, healing return to natural rhythm. 2. Reclaiming the perimeter, the wisdom of absolute darkness. The first, easiest, and most profound change you can make is to enforce the boundary of darkness. Think back to the fire's embrace and the imperial sanctuary. Our ancestors' success hinged on controlling the perimeter, ensuring that the environmental signals aligned with the biological imperative for rest. For the modern mind, the single greatest disruption to this alignment is light, specifically blue light. The electric light, as we learned, is the ultimate enemy of rest, suppressing melatonin and delaying the onset of deep sleep. To counteract the electric tyranny, you must establish a digital sunset. Step 1. The 1-hour boundary. Commit to 1 full hour before your desired sleep time, where you eliminate all blue-rich screens, phones, tablets, laptops, and television. This is your modern ritual of purification, your personal preparation for the temple of hypnos.
Instead, look for low, warm, ambient light, the color of the ancestral hearth. Step 2. Melatonin's moment. This hour of darkness allows the pineal gland to finally release the surge of melatonin required to initiate sleep. You are actively signaling to your 4 billion-year-old circadian clock, the day is over. It is safe to begin the descent. Remember, you are not waiting to feel tired. You are using the darkness to become tired. Step 3. Temperature control. The Egyptian wisdom. Recall the elevated beds and ceramic pillows of Imperial Egypt and China. The biological truth is that your core body temperature must drop to initiate and maintain deep rest. Ensure your bedroom is slightly cooler than your waking environment, ideally between 60 and 67 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 to 19 degrees Celsius. This is the external signal that facilitates the internal physiological downshift. Step 4. Sound and silence. The Sentinel's Watch. You do not need the deep silence of the monk's cave, but you need predictability. If your environment is noisy, use low, consistent white noise or pink noise, like a fan or gentle static. This sound creates a continuous, benign sound envelope, allowing the sleep spindles of N2 sleep to effectively block out the sharp, unpredictable sounds that trigger vigilance. The Sentinel is quiet, but it is present, allowing you to let go. By mastering these elements, darkness, temperature, and consistent sound, you create an environmental perimeter that satisfies the primal need for security, allowing the mind to finally trust that the surrender is safe. 3. Reclaiming the cycle. Trusting the body's work. Once the environment is secured, the next act is the most vital: surrender and trust. This requires internalizing the lessons of the architecture of dreams and the first darkness. The key to trusting your sleep is understanding that it is not one single state, but a collection of 4 distinct purposeful work shifts that cycle throughout the night. 1. Honor the early work, deep sleep. The first 3 cycles of your night are dominated by deep sleep, N3, the powerhouse of physical repair and the brain's toxic waste cleansing system, the glymphatic system. This is the first sleep in the biphasic rhythm, and it is non-negotiable for physical health. Remember the cellular imperative. Your brain cells literally shrink during N3 to allow cerebrospinal fluid to rush through and wash away accumulated toxins, like amyloid beta. Actionable trust. Protect your early night. Do not compromise the first 4 hours of your sleep with stimulating activities or large meals, which divert energy away from this crucial physical repair. If you must cut your sleep short, try to make sure that you have achieved these first few N3-rich cycles. 2. Protecting the late work, REM sleep. The second half of your night is dedicated to the long, intense cycles of REM sleep, the emotional workshop. This is where your brain processes the stress of the day without the corrosive chemistry of stress hormones. It consolidates emotional memory, integrates new learning, and fuels creativity. Actionable trust. Recognize that if you consistently cut your night short, waking up early for work or exercise, you are disproportionately sacrificing REM sleep. The consequence is not physical tiredness, but emotional volatility, lack of clarity, and suppressed creativity. To be a well-balanced, high-functioning human requires protecting these late-night cycles.
3. Embrace the cycle's inflexibility. Your body will attempt to run the full cycle, N1, N2, N3, REM, every 90 to 110 minutes, 4 to 6 times a night. This rhythm is the universal language of rest, Chapter 5. Do not impose a fixed modern time limit on this flexible, ancient rhythm. By internalizing this knowledge, you move from the anxiety of, did I sleep enough, to the confidence of, my body is currently running its vital repair programs. You shift from passive recipient to informed collaborator in your own rest. 4. Reclaiming the pause, the wisdom of the waking hour. The most potent tool for anxiety reduction is derived from the medieval twilight, Chapter 10, and the monk's rest, Chapter 9, reclaiming the midnight pause. The human brain is naturally segmenting, programmed to pause its deepest rest once or twice a night. The industrial age rebranded this natural awakening as insomnia, turning a benign, functional pause into a source of panic. The power of intentional wakefulness. If you wake between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., the first rule is simple: do not panic. You are not failing. You are returning to the historical, ancestral rhythm of the human species. Instead of fighting the moment, use the wisdom of the waking hour. Embrace the low light. If you must get up, avoid bright lights. Use a small, dim red spectrum light source. Do not let the light signal to your brain that it is morning. Do not engage the sentinel. The fastest way to destroy the second sleep is to pick up your phone. The flood of light, information, and social demands reactivates the stress and vigilance centers of the brain. The ritual of quiet work. Use the time for quiet, non-stressful tasks, just as our ancestors did. Reading a physical book by dim light, meditating, engaging in deep breathing, or quietly contemplating a solution to a problem without the pressure of active planning. The goal is to keep the body horizontal and the mind calm, trusting the hormonal surge of prolactin to guide you gently back to the second sleep. This intentional pause transforms the anxiety of the midnight hour into a deliberate, sacred time. It teaches your brain that a period of wakefulness during the night is acceptable, safe, and temporary, thus removing the stress that actually prevents you from returning to rest. 5. The payoff, the power of the rested mind. After integrating these ancient and modern truths, what is the ultimate payoff? What does a night reclaimed truly grant you? It grants you the calm, resilient, and creative power of a well-rested mind, the very intelligence that allowed our ancestors to build fires and empires. Clarity and resilience, the Roman and Egyptian virtue. When the toxins are cleared and the emotions are processed, the prefrontal cortex, the seat of logic and decision-making, is pristine. You wake up with a sharp, disciplined mind capable of handling abstract threat and complex planning without succumbing to the panic that plagued the hourglass of anxiety. Emotional balance, the monk's discipline. By allowing the REM cycle to prune the emotional edges off yesterday's events, you achieve a state of emotional steadiness. You are less reactive, more patient, and more present. The minor frustrations of the day do not carry the same heavy weight because your mind has already integrated them into a broader narrative of experience. Creativity and foresight, the legacy of the fire. The vast associative power of REM sleep is the engine of human creativity. It takes disparate pieces of information and connects them in novel ways. A well-rested brain is an innovative brain. By protecting your deep rest, you are giving yourself the ultimate advantage, the clarity to see patterns and find solutions that the exhausted mind simply overlooks. Your commitment to rest is not just self-care, it is an investment in your highest self. It is the maintenance of the greatest tool you possess, your consciousness. 6. The final surrender. Tonight, let go of the score, the clock, and the anxiety. You have the tools and the knowledge of 4 billion years of successful adaptation. You know that rest is not a passive break, but an active work shift managed by your own magnificent ancient biology. Trust the darkness to initiate the process. Trust the temperature to guide your deep repair. Trust the rhythm to bring you to the moment of clarity and dreams. There are no more threats outside the perimeter. The fire is burning low, and the sentinel is quiet. The only thing left to do is to allow the profound, healing currents of the night to wash over you. Surrender now to the rhythm that has governed all life since the first dawn. Rest deeply, and we will meet again in the light of a new, well-rested day.